Yeah.
Great. Excuse me, if you take one of these are reserved for our speakers. Can you give them back? I think has anybody taken one of these? They're reserved for our speakers. No? So make it just like that's what we needed. Somebody here in all class to keep an eye on it. Well, that's there. I should have told you to keep an eye on I put them on there.
Oh man. I think it's just go there. I might send it to a
I know, I'm so glad you were able to come. You know, Gracie. You participate in the. Sorry, I'm like.
What about from? What are the things that
participate. Okay, just grab some food or something, okay? I don't wanna. Are you trying to something that's like a requirement. I did mine. So they could
he does he's just putting that.
So they stole the.
Keep going. Some of the stuff I need.
Yeah, that's what we always
But my mentor is pretty good with the stuff.
I asked them. Send somebody else, but you were the one who's taking all the PowerPoints and everybody already know that. That's yeah. So make sure you have a. That's what I asked. Like, she should be here. I thought she was going to be here. One of them was something about. Yeah, just put it in. Yeah, we probably will need to take out maybe lights here.
The clicker
Yeah.
I have a question. How do you even answer the classes?
Usually participate in different contests. We're going to work, we need to like guess the buildings that we have and all they are like their buildings and country purpose. And then the person who gets the most gets the prize. Well, you can also vote for your favorite map gallery entry.
We're buying drones, Patricia.
Huh?
I said we're buying drones.
Just vote for your favorite map in the map gallery. So this is a map. Just put entry number 4 is my favorite or something in your name. And
What I write there?
go to the entrance of the library. There's a desk there. There's a video package and then will be a package right where you walk in. They will give you something like this. You just give your name and hit this. So look at this. Yeah. And choose your favorite. You're okay? Yep. Couple minutes.
That'll be 45 seconds.
Yeah, the student was here, but I don't think it's over there.
Who's going first?
Provost, but it's time.
Oh, yeah, I'm not nervous. No, I have this is not that kind of job.
Oh, this was open before. I just didn't know what it was. So what you would do is just this is this. So we have this PowerPoint. So you would just you drag something over here. No, they're just gonna when somebody presents.
Like, I need you to do this with me right now. Something happened, her entry was not put it into, I put it right now. She wants it in, even if it's not. Can we do that right now? That felt terrible. Yeah. Does anybody need enter any contest? We have 5 minutes left.
I think she's here.
What time is it? 4 minutes. Are we going to lock it down in GIS as a background? Or it's a background where the dean talks? Yeah. We have one left.
I think it's
In the front. Oh, my goodness. Which one's by here? Which one's by one? I haven't seen nothing else. You said like the map. Yeah.
Are you introducing Joyce?
Oh,
No,
please go ahead.
I have one for the meeting.
I don't know.
No. We're good.
You're going. Sorry. That's all right. That's your day. I didn't know that. I never made it to our house that time. I and then I found out
I'm gonna put 11.
I will do my best. And I remember you have to keep it limited to 45 minutes. I'm sorry. It's fine. It's wonderful.
I'm good. They're gonna go back.
Yeah, fine. I did.
I'm sorry, I had a little bit for our speakers, but somebody sold them. Sorry about that.
No worries. Whoever-
Wow. Yeah, stay on this one.
It's just like, you just tell me that notebook. Yeah, of course. He's just gonna, you just, name, your name and title.
What do you think? Click.
I'll have some warning for you.
If you don't touch it, it'll just
I'll give you a name.
I know. I have another one at that one.
Yes.
So sad.
Let me say that. So for those of you participating in the conference, we're almost done with the time that we're going to be interrupting because we're going to have our speakers. You have one form here for where in the gallery, and then one for where in the gallery, where in the world, on some buildings. And for your favorite map in the map gallery, you need to bring these ones to the front desk because they're going to start rating them. And you have until 3:30. At 3:30, we close down over there and we move here to count the votes and select the winners. And at 4 o'clock, you need to be present to win. If you're not here at 4, we go to the next person to give away. We have that football signed by Dawes Sweeney and other cool stuff. So make sure to give us this ones in the front entrance before 3:30, and then back here at 4 to claim your prize. Okay. And now we are gonna, yep. Yes, and the entrance, there's a desk there that has GIS days. Okay, do you want to give a few words introducing them? Hey, yes, can we do it right after? They're gonna give it to you. Okay, we are gonna get started. So this one goes. We can start with that. Yes.
Garnet.
Yeah, Garnet, semi-precious.
Totally precious.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started. And to start us off, we're very lucky to have with us some of our administrators from around the campus. So Joyce Garnet is the new interim director, or dean of the libraries, excuse me. And so, of course, as many of you know, the Geospatial Center is an intrinsic partnership between the libraries and CCIT. And so we're very, very privileged to have her come and say a few words for us to kick us off. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. And as Stephen said, the GIS services at Clemson are brought about by a very vibrant and successful partnership between the libraries and CCIT. And standing here as a dean of libraries, I want to say that I can think of no better place for a geospatial center than within the libraries, which is a place for discovery and learning and for multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary initiatives. And libraries are also known and live in the spirit of collaboration and cooperation, and certainly this is a shining example of a collaboration that provided support and services and expertise for the teaching and learning and the research and scholarship mandates of the university. We stand today here in the Cooper Library, and I want to just point out some numbers. The Cooper Library is a very busy place on campus. We have up to 12,000 students who visit every day, And then I thought, if you roll that up for a week of activity, that's the equivalent of a capacity crowd in Death Valley. Just think about that. Just a sea of orange, 12,000 a day. So I want to welcome you all to GIS Day, and thank you for coming. And the students have access to this resource throughout the year and can engage with the staff and students when they have the need and learn more about GIS. But today is a fun learning experience. I hope you got a chance to experiment, eat some of this wonderful food, a lot of sugar buzz. And I invite you to return, because this is part of the future of learning, part of the future of research, and part of the future of the library. So welcome to GIS Day.
And just to thank you, Joyce, this is actually, I think many of you guys have seen this, but this is a 3D printed model of campus. Not only is it 3D printed, but this was actually collected by one of our drones flying over the campus to create the 3D model
exciting.
and then take it to the 3D printer.
So this is in a night light, presumably.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Really quickly, I don't know actually if all of you know who I am. So I'm Stephen Moisey.
Everybody knows you, Steve.
I am the faculty director of the Geospatial Center. Many of you don't see me here, but because Patricia is really the heart and drives everything at the center. But and I'm even so bad at it that I don't have my green shirt on. Then I should. So I apologize, Patricia. At least I'm here, unlike the year I went to supercomputer. So. Next, I'd like to introduce Dustin Atkins, representing CCIT for us, and please, Dustin.
Absolutely. I'll be very brief because all the lightning talk speakers have much more interesting things to say than I do. As Stephen said, I'm Dustin Atkins here representing CCIT. I serve on the leadership team. We are happy to partner with the libraries and the Geospatial Center, Patricia and Stephen, Blake, all the others who have really put this on. Thank you, and thank you all for attending. Again, we are very happy to collaborate on an endeavor such as GIS Day, not only a day, but all throughout the year through centers such as the one that you're in now, and through supporting research and education through GIS all across the campus. So thank you again, and I'm done.
So we have one quick announcement. Go ahead.
Yeah. A very quick announcement. I'm Gerald Lehmacher, Physics and Astronomy. First, I want to thank GIS because they supported in my class Physics of Global Climate Change 33 students groups with a workshop, and 2 of their projects are featured there in the gallery. The other ones I still have to wait for here in the semester. But today is a busy day. We are showing at 4:30 the Department of Physics and Astronomy, the Department of Environmental Earth Sciences, and supported by other university groups, the movie Inconvenience sequel. And so the second movie by and with Al Gore in Daniel Auditorium at 4:30. So if you care for a free show, please come. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have, how are we doing with time? So we have 8 minutes. We're going to start lining talks with our plenary session on GIS for emergency management and disaster. I don't know if you're familiar with that special partnership that Clemson has with the Caribbean Initiative. There's a lot of faculty and students have been working very hard during Hurricane Maria to work to facilitate activities. We're very excited. We couldn't think of a better topic to start. So we are going to start with our plenary session at 1:30. Please be seated and ready to go at 1:30. Our talks are lining talks. That means the speakers have 10 minutes and they're done. We have 1 minute for one question, and when we go to the next one. So we really appreciate if you can move and talk within between that minute, because what we want is to offer a variety of topics, so we don't spend half an hour on a topic that might not be as interesting to you as others. So you're going to get a taste, you're going to get inspired by the work that they're doing and how GIS can truly help. We'll be back here at 1:30 in 5 minutes, okay?
You want to start early? Because some of us might talk long.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
1:30 is fine.
No, we can start right now.
You want to start?
Sure.
Yeah, probably makes sense to show ahead.
Yeah,
Get up.
Who gets there?
Rallying the back is hard.
Okay.
Who was in this week?
Chris Vincent. And he's also the one. So,
All right.
they have a clicker.
But then you're say, hey, maybe people learn more, or you just hear it?
Kind of like a job.
We've been doing some work with GIS.
Okay. Also, can we have a prize for, we got that, best question.
I noticed some of it was
Do we
like
have that?
interactive.
Okay.
GIS.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
That was falls right up my
Oh. Yeah, very green. Can I get your name? Where did I put it?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Has anybody seen the stick note?
Oh, no, no.
I totally didn't think that you said.
Oh,
I just send her.
Maybe that'd be his job.
What's her name? Anna? Anna? Like that? Oh. You grab one of do you get one of the pencils or pens?
That's like, we're making some looking here out of this. So it'd be sort of like. Find it just public outreach is one of like my walls underneath. He does the most of the GIS. It's complicated. Typically, I do the GIS.
Oh, okay.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Our first presenter today is Dr. Stephen Joyce, who you may recognize. He'll be talking to us about crowdsourcing for the topic.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about just an experience I had and I want to share with you because I think it's the kind of thing that shows how powerful GIS is and what kinds of things we can do with it to make a difference. You know? And so many of you or some of you that are here participated in the Mapathon earlier, and that's one good example, right, of how we can get in, make a difference, help out, people in need. And so in this particular example, this is similar but a little bit different. This is related. You guys all remember Hurricane Maria coming around, and I don't know how many of you have actually heard too much about Dominica and what happened in Dominica, but this talk is really about some of that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the background to what happened, and then just really briefly kind of what happened with GIS. So I want to point out all the people, and this isn't an exhaustive list. I know I missed Willie and some other people on this list, but there's so many people that made an impact to make this whole thing actually happen. So it's really not me. I was just kind of around, and everyone else really kicked in a lot to make this happen. So many of you heard about the hurricane probably coming in to Dominica, Hurricane Maria. But one of the things that is so interesting about it when we think about the impacts and what could have happened there was one day the hurricane came September 18th. So this is at 2 a.m. Monday morning. The hurricane report saying the hurricane's coming in, it's likely going to become a big storm. It's out here, category 1. By the time it got to Dominica, the projection was maybe category 3. A big hurricane, but not huge. By later that day, so this is now like around just before midnight, that same day, it had gone from a category 1 to a category 5. Nobody had expected that. So it went from this kind of storm, big storm, to like a giant storm that no one had anticipated. And so just even thinking about, how are people getting prepared? What are they thinking about? Are they getting ready in the right ways? I'm not sure, that everyone was really ready for it. So that night, September 18th, the hurricane, the whole eye of the hurricane went over Dominica, and it really devastated the island. It really impacted people broadly. So it was kind of a semi-famous set of Facebook posts now that came out from the Prime Minister of Dominica. So this was kind of earlier in the evening. It says, the winds are merciless. We we shall survive by the grace of God. A little bit later, certainly no sleep for anyone in Dominica. I believe my residents may have sustained some damage. A little bit later, rough, rough, rough. My roof is gone. I'm at the complete mercy of the hurricane. The house is flooding. This is the prime minister, right? And then finally, a little bit after that, I've been rescued. And so this, if I recall correctly, was around midnight, a little bit later in the morning. This last post came out saying initial reports of widespread devastation. So far, we've lost all what money can buy and replace, and so on, right? Just the initial impacts, and this was before even light of day, seeing what was happening, were clear that there was devastation, because this was the last time that the prime minister said anything for many days after this. Basically, after that point, all communication was pretty much lost in Dominica. No one had any clue what was going on. One of the reasons I cared and I was interested, we have a research station. Clemson has a research station in Dominica. We take students down there on a regular basis, and we have people down there that we know and we care about. And so I was really like, what's going on? I don't know what's happening to all these people down there. And so luckily, this is where Stuart starts to come into this talk. He's going to speak later. The first communication started to come out even earlier the next day, but it wasn't through any formal means of communications. It was through ham radio operators. And so Stuart could tell us much more about the whole story of how that came to be. But pretty much he was one of the people to get together all these ham radio operators, start collecting all this information, working with a radio station down in the Caribbean to help disseminate the information out, right? And so this was really critical where we started. This was really the main lifeline in terms of people getting information about what's going on. Even NPR had a story, right, about how these ham radios became a critical link to communication. And so all this is going on, and we're seeing these things happen. Stuart's putting out, Stuart Giddens, who's at the back to speak later on, was putting out information and these posts from the ham radio operators, getting information out. Started to get some information by the 20th, this is 2 days after the hurricane, about people getting flyovers of the area to look at damage and what had actually happened. The first glimpses, no one could land on the island yet, but seeing what's going on. And then towards the end of this day, there actually started to be a little bit of connectivity in terms of text messages going on, very limited. So the main source of information was still coming from these radio stations. So I was sitting there at home. It actually turned out part of what made all this happen is I had the flu. And so I was at home in bed listening to all of this stuff going on, listening to the radio, and all I could hear over and over again was people calling in, what about this place? What about that place? What's happening to these people? I need to know what's going on. No one knew. And it was over and over again, the same questions, the same places. And I said, look, we have a geospatial center. We have GIS. Why can't we get the information out there to people so they can actually hear what's going on and go for themselves and see what's happening? And so it was on that second. So Monday, the hurricane hit, Monday night. Tuesday, I was kind of in shock all day long. And then Wednesday, we made this crowdsourcing map where we started to get information where we said we want to get people to take what they know about what's happening and going on in Dominica so that we can share it and disseminate it and they can get information back. And so it's interesting because we started to take information from all of those radio reports, right? From anyone who maybe had gotten a text message somehow from some of their family or knew something what was going on. And eventually, some videos started coming out and images and things on social media. And so we started saying, well, let's get all of that information. People who know these places, let's get you to take these images and add them to this map. So we created this crowdsourcing map that was available on the web to anyone. It really had two parts. So this is kind of the map part where you could go and add to it. But there was the map itself where people were posting information. So you go to a particular location and add information using a form where anybody, you didn't have to be on the island. You could just say, I know this place. and you could go and add that information to the map. And we also asked people to give us some information about what was the condition of that area, what was going on, and upload an image to kind of verify and validate, what your assessment was, so people would know more about it. And so that's really what we started doing, and people started adding information to this map and really helping us see what was going on. At the same time, a few days after the hurricane, they were finally able to start doing satellite imagery over the island. And so we started adding that kind of data to the map as well. So people could see for themselves, right, the data they posted, imagery they posted from social media and so forth, as well as then locally what was going on the island from this satellite imagery. And so that, kind of gave this information where people could start to say, well, now I know what's actually happening. All of this information, right, was all from the public and students. We actually had some of our mapathons, Jennifer in particular really helped encourage people from Engage Dominica and other groups to come out and contribute some of that information from social media. And so we ended up having about just over 300 distinct points added to the map, giving data about what was actually going on. And so that was pretty cool to have that much information there available to people. I think the other thing that's cool is, well, how much did people actually use this information? And in this period where there was this big gap, right, where no one knew what was happening, what was going on. So these are just some of the examples of the kind of imagery that we had that people were posting and looking at for the assessment. You can see, I mean, I'm not going to go into this because we don't have time, but the whole island was pretty much devastated. So this is what I was talking about. In the few days, right, so the hurricane hit on the night of the 18th. Tuesday was the day, I was in shock. Wednesday was the day we put the map up. And you can see, that huge need for information that people have, right? So this, thousands of people started looking at this map and trying to see what was going on. So obviously over time, as information started to become more formal, there was that opportunity to tail off. People had other sources of information, but I think we really played a critical role here in getting this information out. So my last slide is, to do this was not difficult, right? We all have the tools. Every single one of you sitting in this room have the tools to do exactly what we did by just opening up ArcGIS Online, Survey 123, this drag and drop kind of tools to create what we created. It wasn't super hard. So I think all of you guys, when you have a situation, no matter what it is, Hurricane Maria or an issue in your local home or area, you have the opportunity to go and make a difference using the kinds of tools that are available. So that is the end.
All right, we have 1 minute for questions.
One question? Everybody?
How would people able to access this if everything was out? I meant on the island, if they wanted to find out what was happening.
So on the island, so who I was targeting initially was really more the diaspora, because those were the people that were saying, what's going on? We don't have any information. We don't know what's happening on the island. And so they were also the ones who were potentially starting to get information from whatever source they had. So that was I was envisioning it to go from us to the diaspora to the island, kind of that way. And so they had access. Later on, as some information started to come back, as some internet started to come back on the island a little bit, people wanted to start adding things like, this is a place you can go on the island to get resources. And so we started to add a little bit of that as well.
Who represented the diaspora?
Pardon me?
Who represented that diaspora?
Who represented them in terms of
like diaspora who who are spread out from the original place,
right.
But
So
because I'm not, you mean the people on the island, or people who go to school here, just have to be on the island?
no, people from the island that have gone all over the rest of the world. So there are people all over one of the things on our map I didn't show as well. So people started in Houston and Toronto and the UK, they started adding points to say, we're having a relief activity here. So come at this time, this place, this is where you can go to drop off donations, things like that. There's this huge community of people, off the island that were really interested in knowing what was going on back on the island. So that's, who we were targeting.
How would you validate the results that people are uploading?
How would I evaluate?
How would you validate that they are uploading the thing?
That's a great question. So I think that is one of the fundamental issues with crowdsourcing, right? How do you make sure that people are giving you valid data? And I think that's, I had a lot of disclaimers. This is crowdsourcing, take it or leave it. That said, we actually had NASA contact us because they were creating satellite-based damage maps, and they wanted to use our data and the images as validation for their maps.
Oh.
So, there is that issue. How do you validate? How do you get information? And so, initially in this case, we were relying on, say, social media and crowdsourcing. That's a problem. But if you start to bring in other sources of data that come together and support each other, and maybe eventually you start to have data networks, where you're getting information from different places, you can start to do reliability analysis. And I think in the long term, you could, if you were really being forward thinking, you could think about how do we use social media, machine learning, and GIS and all kinds of tools together to start to filter out reliability. All right, I'm going to
thank you, everyone. Thanks. So our next speaker is Dr. Jennifer Ogle. She will be presenting from Clemson University in civil engineering, and she will be talking about preserving the past and envisioning the future.
Oh, you know what?
Thank you.
Do you want us to just roll when you want us to?
Yeah, I'll just tell you to kind of go down. It's picture by picture, and I'll leave that here. Okay, so what I'd like to spend my time talking with you about is a little bit of extension of what Stephen was just telling you about the crowdsourcing maps, of the work that students are doing in Dominica and some of the things that they were seeing, and kind of like going up to this whole storm happening. The students had been there in March and collected a bunch of data. So I'm going to kind of tell you that story, but then tell you what's happening now after Maria. So I work with a group of students that's referred to as Clemson Engage. And right now we are working in Dominica through the ATREC facility that Clemson owns. We have met a number of people on the island and started really developing a relationship with the community of Sioux Frere. So in March, this group of students went down and did a number of activities. Everything from driving around the island, looking at the prior damage. The reason we were going down was the prior damage from Tropical Storm Erica in October of 2015. And so they had already lost pretty much all of the bridges on the island. Many of the bridges that have been put back were Bailey bridges, temporary bridges. It's a beautiful place. We'll get to some of that in a minute.
Will be.
If you'd like to know more, clemsonengage.org is the website, so you can go scroll through and see some of our projects we've done. And that gives you some of the projects that we're working on. But one of the big things that we're doing is helping the community of Sioux Frere with their water. And so when we went down in March, we were actually working on this particular water system. And so this is a spring-fed water source, and it is a three-sided reservoir. The backside is a natural wall, and so anything that water rainfall that comes down on the land is going to run right into this reservoir. So while it is a spring-fed reservoir, it has some issues. It's an open source. And so we were looking at how we could make this water system better and less, have potential less impact from storms. When Tropical Storm Erica came through, this whole area was flooded, and the floodwaters went over into the reservoir area, and it completely filled up with mud, and it contaminated all pipes. Going down. And so you can see how the back wall of this reservoir is a natural area. Birds can fly over, animals can swim in it. So we sat down and met with a number of people from the community. This is Cardinal Felix. He actually lives in Soufriere. We have several members of the community, DeWasco, the water system, some teachers, and council members. This is us at the water system working with DeWasco's operator for the Soufriere system. He's the one that keeps that pool of water as clean as it can be. But this is the students out doing water tests. Is Katie still here? Okay. I told her that I had some pictures of her in the presentation. So we did significant water tests. And one of the things we want to do is be able to keep that data. So we want to be able to take a GIS system, and as we're collecting data over time, be able to preserve that data so we understand the changes that we may be making when we put new systems in. Go on down. And so, and scroll it just a little bit more. Nope, back down a little bit. So one of the things that you may not have noticed is that that reservoir had water inside of it, and there was water on the other side as well. And so we looked at the two water sources. These tests are from the water inside. This is from the water outside. And so when the water from the outside reached and went in, nasty water started flowing into everyone's homes. So what we did was we took a LiDAR system down with us to Dominica. That was a lot of fun, traveling with all of that equipment. Yours is so much tinier. It's so big. And so we set that up, and we were actually able to collect all of the information. We did 3D maps of this whole area, the pump house, everything around the area, so that we could bring all that data back and start to develop plans for how we might be able to cap the system to keep it from being breached in future storms. And these, you can just kind of scroll through these. So these are drawings and all of what the students have put together of what it would be, and some cost estimates to actually get this in place. So right after we came back, we did all this work. The students submitted several different proposals to get this water system funded, and then Maria. So we were in the middle of getting funding to protect the water source so that in a storm such as this, it would not be compromised. Maria happens, go on down. And if you recall, looking at the pictures, here is kind of the wall around the water source. Let's scroll on up. This, oops, go back down a little bit. This is the wall that's around that water source. And note that there's no water there. That's just all mud and debris left over from Maria. It was a huge mudslide, lots of landslides in this area. They all washed down the creek bed, filled the water source again, and so that community was without water until about 5 days ago. So the storm happened September what? 19th, 18th, 19th overnight, and a week ago, so November. So that water, that community was getting water wherever they could, mostly from the nasty stream that had been flowing through. There was little bits and pieces of it still flowing through, and so they were using that as their only water source. Roads are another issue, and so we've been looking a lot at the roads. So when we think about what a GIS can do for us in terms of preserving what has happened in the past and the situations that are there, we can take that information and help to envision what the future could and should be. But it relies, we have to rely on all of the information of what has happened in the past. But if we don't log and protect that information and preserve it, we won't have a good idea about how to move into the future. And you can go down just a few. So there are many ways in which land can shift and move, and that's one of the big problems in Dominica. Lots of steep hillsides, lots of rainfall. They have rain just about every day. They have 365 rivers. 365 rivers, 365 days a year. Kind of a funny little thing that they say. But these are some of the conditions on some of the roads. So lots of overhanging areas where the road has kind of been built underneath. Every time there's a storm, large rain, small earthquake, this particular road or this particular lane shifts, and that road to Soufriere is blocked off every single time. And it looks something like this. And so it's not something that Joe and Bob can go take, you know, a little tractor or something and go move a few rocks. It takes big, big equipment. So that's what we're dealing with. But with GIS, the LiDAR, we can actually bring a lot of stuff home and logging all of these things. So as we're taking pictures, we're getting GIS locations, and we're identifying the places where we have problems so that we can help them understand what their problems are, so that we can come up with some solutions for the community. Okay, so that's it for me. Any questions? We measured all those things. So heavy metals, very high ion content. It was turbid. You can imagine when you have water running off a natural slope into a reservoir, there is turbidity. Very much so after storms. If it's been fairly clear for a couple of days, the water, it settles and the water looks really nice. We also looked at salinity. There's very high salinity because of the area in which it is in. We also looked at coliform count. The particular source that we're looking at here, they do add chlorine. That's the only treatment. There's no filtration, nothing else. So they were.
Index the quality.
So their water was in world. So after it's chlorinated and goes out to the community, it is within World Health Standards, but it was pretty much on the borderline of every single one of those.
Thank you very much.
Chris, can I just say something? For those of you who participated in the mapathon, I just want to make a call for what she was saying, how important it is information. During lunch, there were students mapping roads and buildings in Uganda, just helping with infrastructure for USAID. So thank you for making that connection. And they donated their time trying to, map infrastructure.
Our next speaker is Stuart Gittens, who is the Managing Director of Research and Development for ECD Solutions. Welcome.
You have a...
So maybe I could say something really briefly.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
You're the boss. No. I was just going to say, Stuart, so I mentioned him several times in my talk, and we really invited him because he was so integral to, passing of information from Dominica and to the public. And then it was really kind of by because of technology, social media, we met on Twitter actually to start communicating. He really helped get information about the map, I would think. But he really has some really great ideas about how to work with disasters in that area. So I just wanted to create that connection of he was really integral to everything we had done at the center for getting that information out. So I don't need to take up your time. Start the timer again.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for that introduction. So I'm from the Caribbean, and basically, as you heard, when disasters strike, post the disaster, pretty much all of the infrastructure is in a crisis state. And one of the issues that we face in the Caribbean is that this state will be in existence for days, weeks, months. If you look at the situation in Puerto Rico, there's almost no end in sight for when the electrical infrastructure is going to come back up. The problem that poses in the Caribbean is that outside of Puerto Rico is that we have no financial infrastructure to quickly bring things up to speed. So we find ourselves using low-tech solutions. And by low tech, I almost want to say no tech solutions. And getting data out of Dominica, in this instance, in the first, I want to say 10 days, was right back to amateur radio. I have my FCC license. I never speak of my FCC license because people mostly think of amateur radio as breaker, you know, guys in trucks talking to each other. No. And so today I want to introduce you to a mind space where you start to think of radio communications as a method for delivering data outside in a post-crisis situation. So getting that data from Dominica or Barbados or any of the islands in a hurricane situation is critical. It ended up being that there were about 6 of us that took this project on over those days, and it meant sleepless nights for all of us, but it was an invaluable service to the diaspora that Stephen spoke to, and we use very low-tech methods. I'm going to show you what technology has brought. So this is called an Sdr Dongle, and I'll mention it over time, but I thought I'd bring it to your attention early. So you don't have this preconception of a guy with a transistor radio with earphones. This is what delivers data in and out, out of Dominica, comes into this device. I can capture a span of spectrum. That spectrum could be about 2 megahertz. It can include audio, it can include data, it can include anything that you can think of. It can be communicated digitally. So this is where this device comes in. The amazing thing about this is that 10 years ago, SDR technology was $10,000, $15,000. These babies are on eBay for $19. So that's where it has great utility in our region post-disaster. It's very low cost. It receives the entire spectrum of data. It can do spectrum analysis. It can do microwave analysis. It can receive LiDAR. It can receive ADBS data from aircraft. It's a very, very versatile device. So I just wanted to put that in your mind space. Let's take a peek. So some of the challenges that we had was getting all of this information, centralizing it, and putting it to the GIS. So that's where I came in on the side of the radio capture. We also sourced information from crowdsourced internet sources. And to one of the questions, validation, what I did with the SDR is I captured the actual audio of all of the e-com traffic in Dominica. I put it on the web as well. So when Stephen is mentioning the validation, I'm thinking, well, I actually had the police reports captured, and it's still there for you to evaluate yourself. And a lot of research comes out of that audio because we see some pitfalls. We analyze for strengths and weaknesses and opportunities. That data is invaluable, that audio data. So we'll get to that. So basically, with an HF radio, you've got two-way digital communication. And again, you have voice communication, but more importantly, I think, is digital communication. You have the opportunity to collect data from crowdsource, and then drone capture. So I also want to touch on the fact that UAVs, I think, solve all of these issues. UAVs, once up in the sky, capture, obviously, the situation on the ground. But importantly for me is that they can act as a radio relay. They're up in the sky, they're about 150 feet. That's the kind of height you need to bounce to another island with no interruption. That gives operators like myself an opportunity to improve the bandwidth speed between the islands. So you're looking at some amateur radio equipment here. Don't want to use the word amateur because they do some very specific things. Most importantly is this handheld device, unlike your grandfather's walkie-talkie, has built-in GPS. It has a built-in modem, and it has simultaneous voice and data communications. That blows the roof off for emergency responders. They can take these devices, walk around, capture a picture with this device, and send it out to the world real time. These are the sort of tech solutions that the Caribbean needs relatively low cost to solve the challenge of getting communications out post-disaster. So, talk about that. Basically, you're looking at what you need. Keeping your batteries well stored. We spoke earlier about the quality of batteries. Lithium-ion batteries ran the roost for the last 10 years. It's actually lithium iron phosphate batteries that are the new technology. Better chemistry, less fire risk. Those are great batteries to have at the emergency service. Where to store them? Fire stations, hospitals, great places to have them in redundancy. Standardized devices, not having 6 different brands of radios. All of these things, brain dead, simple things, but really go a long way to solving the riddles post-disaster in the prison. Oh, importantly, antennas. It may shock you, but we have had people come into the region and implement $20, $30 million projects with high-tech communications. First thing that happens in a hurricane, blows right down, right? And the tower is gone, and your $1 million equipment is absolutely dead. Then you come back to the very basics. And a dipole antenna, which is basically 2 wires. Anyone can deploy it. You sling it in a tree, and on 5 watts of power, you can communicate across the globe, digital data. So that's very important as well. How am I? Okay. So, when we're talking about evaluation and deployment, we're trying to get an assessment of what are the needs, how are we going to deploy the HF equipment in the islands, how are we going to deploy digital communications, what means of communications, these are all digital modes. At very low power, you'll hear me repeat the word low power. Low power is important because, of course, the grid is down and you're relying on your batteries. So the least amount of power to get the data out becomes very, very important. Software-defined radios. As you saw, I held the dongle in my hand. With the Raspberry Pi, that dongle becomes a very potent tool. This is all up there on the net. You can evaluate it yourself. I'd encourage any student out there that hasn't heard the word SDR, that's in GIS, to really put it on your map. Because it has so much utility and at such low cost. And for the makers out there in the room, it's something that I would think is on your radar as well. You can decode, importantly for the region, it also decodes, that little device decodes satellite data. So you're in a post-event situation. What the heck's going on in the sky? There's no way for you to know because there's no communication in or out. Well, the same device is going to be able to decode satellite comms in real time. So you can pull down your sat data and decode it. I mentioned before, it can record huge swath of the radio spectrum, so you can do post-event analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is some starting points, some talking points around communications post-disaster. I've published this online. It's been well received. I spoke about drones being the sort of one of the great tools I think going forward for getting data out. Would love to speak about that. And finally, I want to say thank you. I know I was kind of quick, but importantly, you have to realize that in the Caribbean, we have to be innovative with little resources. And that's the challenge that we face. So getting an opportunity to speak to an institution like Clemson is invaluable. And any of your ideas is probably superior to mine, so I'm all ears. Any questions?
Here's a question. So you make a very good case for why radio frequencies is a better and more effective means of communication and serving that kind of need post-disaster. And it's cheap, right? So my question is this a technology? I mean, you happen to be a ham radio operator, know about this and have some of those tools in-house. Is it something that is a technology that's being used for other purposes on a daily basis, such that when the event happens, it's a widespread technology that everybody's already carrying around? Or is it the kind of thing where they have to go back to their house and dig it out of the file in their emergency kit and that kind of stuff?
I think the predicate to that question should be what's available on the island.
Mhm.
Because you're right, there are other technologies, and my preview is not myopic, believe me.
Mhm.
My decision to go that route is because it's the most reliable
Mhm.
means of getting data out.
Yeah.
So there are absolutely countless other
Mhm.
venues for
Mhm.
accomplishing what I want to do, but it's the proven
Yeah.
most robust
Right.
methodology.
And so my kind of question is then, if that's the best technology for response,
Mhm.
how does that technology then get disseminated to the daily practice of everyday life such that it's available and widespread when people are unprepared?
It's a great question. I think I will take you up on that afterwards because the explanation is not, I can't do that in a
Well,
minute.
no, but
No, but I think if I might jump into it, that's what I'm thinking also for the GIS community. We're being evolving so much, being so sophisticated. We have these big supercomputers, and then it happens something like this. There's no power. There's nothing coming up. We need to go back to that. So I think we need to rethink ourselves and say, maybe I don't need to teach you this, but maybe we need to do an SDR class as well, so everybody has that basic knowledge, and just adjust ourselves, because we've been in this technology kind of ramp up where then the biggest and the fastest and in these situations it just didn't work at all. Her students were looking at a video from the Prime Minister and looking at the video to determine what they knew that was down on which bridge because they were familiar with it. All of our big technology that we were ready to use, we couldn't. And so I think it's a time to rethink and say, this is the great idea, and this is reality, and then bring it back.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
And the device also, I didn't mention this in my speak, it can update GIS data in real time with a Python script. I was speaking to Mr. Python over there as we were walking back from the car, and it was wonderful because that's one of the things I've done. I've written Python scripts that help integrate the data that comes in directly into, well, my application needs, but it can be GIS as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Gary Maxwell, who is professor of environmental sustainability and the co-lead of the Clemson Caribbean Initiative.
Young men use PowerPoint. Old men need a lectern. and thank you, Patricia. Thanks for everyone for being here. A brief introduction. I'm new to Clemson. I'm very grateful to be here. Prior to that, I served 8 years in the Obama administration and led the strategic sciences group for the Department of Interior that conducted interdisciplinary research for decision makers during the crises such as the Deepwater Horizon or Hurricane Sandy. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about GIS, but during a particular thing, not before a crisis, not after, but during crises. And to do that, I have to start by saying, remember, maps are instruments of power. The Portuguese in the 1500s, they treated navigational maps as national security secrets. And if you traded a map like Stuart or Stephen just did, off with their heads. It was a politically powerful thing. The map was a political tool. The maps used by Great Britain and the other great powers to carve up the Middle East into nations have political implications that trickle down to the very conflicts and struggles today. And in battles over natural resources, from water to forest to wildlife, it is not too facetious to say whoever has the best map wins. In that a compelling, powerful map is a great tool to convince politicians, decision makers, and sometimes the public. So we should not be surprised that maps and other forms of spatial analysis are vitally important during crises. Here's an example. During the Deepwater Horizon, I was stationed at the Incident Command Center in Mobile, Alabama. It was the size of a huge convention center. And all around the walls of the incident command were maps, just like this, of the disaster, the oil spill, all of them. And at that very time, as I walked around looking at them all, the federal government was denying the existence of plumes, that is, oil that came up from down below and that moved through the Gulf slowly as a plume. And I walked around and looked at all the maps. Not one map, not one, was three-dimensional. Because they were fighting the last oil spill, the Exxon Valdez in Alaska, that was only about that thick. It was a surface spill. And if there were no maps showing the three-dimensional impact, you would not be surprised then the government couldn't conceive that there were plumes. And so visualization becomes extraordinarily important, not just for what it can teach, like others have said, but the trained incapacities, what it teaches you not to look at, because you can't think outside those maps. So what is it that is important about GIS during crisis? I put down 6 challenges. The first is the importance of coupled human natural systems. For decision makers, if you show them a flood map, that's helpful, limited. But if you show them a flood map overlaid with human population or infrastructure or a variety of other social system variables, now decision makers can start to think about policy implications and make decisions. So to the extent that GIS goes down a silo of one discipline or another, as opposed to examining coupled human natural systems, it will fail. And if it expands, it has a chance of being extraordinarily influential. The second is the challenge of collaboration and interdisciplinary teams. GIS professionals, in my opinion, need to be at the table, but not just the technocrats, the old-time cartographers as well. Dr. McKendry and I once wrote a paper about a climate change map that was so bad, published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that we called for what we called a cartographic intervention. That a cartographer would come and help these poor scientists out, actually drawing a map that made sense prior to publication. And so GIS needs to be at the table, not simply producing data, but making sure the visualization adheres to cartographic principles and delivers compelling information to politicians. The third is the importance of uncertainties and limitations. If you're a scientist and you present, let's say, to the Secretary of Interior, or someone in the White House, or a governor, a set of, here, we have our findings, this is what's going to happen, or this is what might happen. Unless you present your uncertainties, the probability that you're wrong or right, they can't act. They're not going to just do something because Gary said, here's the evidence. I have to add to that the uncertainties for them to actually act. But how many of our maps, how many of our visualization techniques actually build into them the ways to express uncertainty? And that's a challenge for you, because if you want it to be used by decision makers, you're going to have to address directly the issues of uncertainty. The fourth is the need to assess cascading impacts. Spatial modeling, to be useful, needs to continually assess the full range of relevant variables. If you took the biological and the physical and the social and the economic and cultural, the real consequences of a crisis migrate across them, back and forth, and they deliver often counterintuitive results. During Hurricane Sandy, a wide range of cultural objects, culturally valuable things, were destroyed or wrecked. And the Park Service, the National Park Service, had to manage dealing with these artifacts during crisis. But the thing they weren't prepared for is the geomorphology was such, new artifacts were being exposed in the middle of trying to protect this historic amusement roller coaster. 3 shipwrecks that nobody even knew about suddenly were exposed, and by law, they had to work to protect them. And so the counterintuitive is it's not like everything gets destroyed. Crises sometimes reveal things. In addition, we are capable of oversights of a grand kind. My strategic science group was working in New Orleans on the second round of the Deepwater Horizon, and we found that the light crude oil being spilled and the Corexit detergent that was being used, if mixed to clean up the oil, and on the skin, the Corexit was an accelerant that would drive the oil into the skin, which was carcinogenic to vulnerable populations, infants, old people, ill people, and pregnant women. And 800 volunteers a week were being sent down to the Gulf without any screening for pregnancy. We were putting people in harm's way because no one had thought of the potential on pregnant or could become pregnant women. And that counterintuitive analysis has to be delivered immediately and in the most compelling of ways. How many of you have heard of elevator talk that you're supposed to do, right? Well, I apologize, faculty, you're telling the wrong thing. That's not the real world. You never get to have the Secretary of Interior in a nice, quiet elevator. It's not raining or it's not anything like that. And my students, to teach them the reality of communicating science during crisis, we do helicopter talks, which would consist of, the reality is, I'm here, you're the Secretary of Interior, Mama, that's okay too. And we've got to get to the helicopter, the young woman in the plaid, you're the helicopter. So you're the helicopter. We've got to get to you. All these people are talking, the blades making noise, it's pouring rain. You've got 20 seconds for me to explain to you how we're putting those women in harm's way. And I, being mortal, forgot my iPad that had all the graphs and charts. And as we're walking, he's trying to put his helmet on, it's noisy, the National Guard guys are grabbing him, and I'm trying to give him a science lecture. I'm drawing it on my palm. It's a true Palm Pilot. Drawing it on my palm. And I had to restrain myself from going, look, I've got time to explain it to you, Secretary. Go look in the mirror. My point is, the ability to communicate during crisis is a skill that you need to develop, Two more, the importance of sense of place. Obviously, as Stephen has talked and others have talked, sense of place during crisis is extremely important and will be helpful. And then sixth, the creation of maps that tell the story clearly. I can't emphasize enough to you, the output from ArcInfo is not a map. It's just stuff. And in fact, it often is ugly stuff. And what you've got to do is say, how do I take this output and create a map that tells the story in the right time? Two other things very briefly. And one is that I'm going to be doing a seminar on crises, resilience, and recovery for graduate students. Undergraduates can take it next semester, 1 credit if you're interested. And the second is, I urge you in the future, I believe GIS will become way more important to decision makers, particularly as it's democratized and citizens will be able to do it. It will become even more important for you to remember, it's not just technology. The maps you are making are instruments of power. Thanks.
Do we have time for a panel, or we have 5 minutes for a panel? Yeah. So we are supposed to have a panel session with our 4 speakers for our plenary session. If you don't mind coming back, the 4 of you, and being able to answer some questions, I'll get some chairs over here for a few minutes.
Any questions?
Did you get fired by Trump?
Yes. Actually, the way it works, you know it's happening, is that as his hand went up, to go on the Bible, my resignation was accepted. Somewhere between this and here, I became a full-time tiger.
His loss. Okay, there you go.
Any questions for the panel?
5 minutes.
I have a question. Where do you see, based on this latest events that we have, and not only with the hurricanes, but also the fires? I'm from Spain. We have pretty bad, unique fires similar to Northern California. How do you see, things evolving in terms of disaster management and what GIS can do? I think, Stuart made a very compelling argument. And what is your vision for that?
I understand the intriguing nature and interest in working with local communities and stakeholder engagement and that kind of grassroots kind of GIS. I get it. But the reality is it will be the politicians and the decision makers, the military, and those in power that often make life and death decisions. I believe as much effort needs to be put into educating them, educating up, and working with decision makers under their constraints as it is to work with local folk. To work with local folk and gather all this information and not be able to communicate to decision makers during crisis will not help local communities. You might feel good, oh, I'm working with local people, but sometimes it actually is necessary to figure out how do you do that helicopter walk if you had not 10 minutes, but you had a minute to explain to a very busy politician what's going on and what are the consequences. How would you do that compelling?
Thank you.
Let me ask a question. Stephen, you had, in one of your kind of summary comments, you had said, anybody can do this, right? I mean, it's not hard.
I can do it.
I mean,
so
you,
anyone can do it.
I probably couldn't do it, but a lot of people can do it. And probably some of that, embedded in that statement is probably a bunch of, you just know how to do it because you know how to surf the internet and you're better at technology if you're a generation younger than somebody else. So I imagine there's a certain component of that is just sort of passive knowledge. So if you were thinking about, let's say we're students, whether we're undergraduates or graduates, a lot of the stuff we can learn just on our own. What is it most important to invest in some guided training and education on?
That's a good question. So I think, there's different ways about thinking about that, right? Because part of it could be the guided training and education about the technologies and things like that. But I think a little bit chicken and egg maybe, but that's important. And, we do a lot of that at the center. But there's also the, what is the information? What is the story we're trying to tell? How are we creating this map or creating information to communicate something meaningful? And so I think that side of understanding, the context of problems and why information would be important in that context, to me would be really critically important before, bringing in the technology side of things. And I think, Patricia does a really good job, and all of the people at the center do a really good job, I think, when we do training. Like, she will give me a hard time because she never likes my maps because she really critically thinks about, what is the information? What is that story you're trying to tell? And I think that aspect of things, coming back to communication, what's the fundamental message you're trying to say? I think that's, we all need that, and then we can use the right tools to get that message out.
And I actually wrote it down, like maybe we can invite Stuart, for example, to come in. We just did our first drone and LiDAR workshop this morning. The play was running. Can we incorporate some basic SDR, like you were saying? I think as Clemson has this initiative on emergency management, it will be. So we might be contacting you very soon.
When you get back to basic technology, how many stewards are there in the world? Because you need people who know how to do this and are prepared to step forward and make it.
And that goes to the point of context, right? Because there's always an audience for your map and the context of it. It doesn't matter how many stewards there are. Most important is that Stuart wants to spread the knowledge net to as far a diaspora as possible so that it can be replicated over and over and over. we're drifting further away from technology, and that's great. In the Caribbean, it just simply does not work, and that goes back to context again. So there's got to be someone in the middle, and that's Stephen, really, that harnesses those energies, finds a path for implementation. So it's not really about how many stewards, it's really simple to his point. This is not an academic exercise.
And I would say that, I mean, thinking about what we did, we collected a whole bunch of data, we put it in place, but how do we archive that? How can we harness the power of the library and information systems to actually get that information out to where it's more usable to the populace going forward? So we've learned a lot from these storms, but we've got to keep spreading that information and spreading what we've learned in a way that's going to be archived, so
it can be reused.
Yes.
And go ahead. No, I think that's a great point because it ties into his question about validation, and that's why I capture the data and I put it in the cloud, because it has to be validated. If it's going to have any sort of research attached to it, it has to be validated. So part of the reason I capture the data and I store both the digital and the audio data is for post-evaluation. And that's where I think SDMA also, Caribbean Disaster Management Agency, that's where I think they want to go with the data collected as well. So, and that ties into the validation question.
So I'm going to jump in on this question a little bit too, because I think it does and it doesn't matter how many stewards there are. So I think it doesn't matter in the sense that it takes one steward, right, or one person to make a huge difference and make a huge impact. And I see that over and over again, right? It was that vision, that person who enables something to happen, causes this transformation to happen. But at the same time, for us, from an academic perspective, right, we have the responsibility and the need to create all of those stewards that are going to be out there, that are going to be impassioned, compassionate, ethical, have the tools and resources to go out and say, I see the problem. I'm going to have, the creativity and innovation to take the tools and resources available to me, whatever those are, and make a difference. And so in that sense, I disagree. We need many, many stewards out in the world to really make a difference in whatever they're doing. But that's a very academic perspective.
The Clemson Caribbean Initiative, is it solely focused on Dominicana, or would it expand other regions in the Caribbean or other developing countries?
The Clemson Caribbean Initiative covers the whole Caribbean, which would include Cuba as the CARICOM nations and also Lower Keys and Florida. And it's faculty, student, and staff driven, and there is no one place it focuses on. And it deals with research, teaching, and service, all three of the land-grant missions. There's a website that you can go to, but it's much broader than that. And it's not top-down organized. It's facilitating and encouraging people to get involved. And I would urge any and all of you who want to learn about it or get engaged to do so.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to move on to our next presentation. We are going to hear from Jonathan Orion, who is the Communications Fellow and Acting Center Lead for NASA Develop. Jonathan is also a former intern at the Center for Geospatial Technologies, and we are very proud to have him back today.
Thank you for having me. Happy GIS Day, everybody. As they mentioned, my name is Jonathan. I'm the current Acting Center Lead and Communications Fellow at the NASA Develop node in NCEI. That's the National Center for Environmental Information in Asheville. We're in the NOAA building with the Climate Monitoring Branch in downtown Asheville. So today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the NASA Develop program and how we kind of bridge the gap between the remote sensing data taken from NASA satellites and society. So when people think NASA, they think, the first thing that comes to mind is space, astronauts. But something that people don't really think about is a large part of the reason we went into space in the first place is so we could look back at the Earth and see it from, you know, the larger picture. So us examining things here in Clemson is like, imagine taking a big mural and looking at it from an inch away. So from space, we can see the bigger picture and how everything interacts as an entire system. So we currently have 18 Earth observation satellites, and we also have 3 instruments on the International Space Station. So each satellite kind of has its own niche of what it does, what the data is good for. The Develop program falls under NASA Applied Sciences. So what we do, the mission of NASA Applied Sciences is to partner with public and private organizations, discover innovative Earth science applications for the satellite data, support environmental decision-making activities, demonstrate the practical benefits of NASA Earth science, and help improve the overall quality of life here on Earth. So we have 9 thematic application areas. Sorry, I had to count them because we just changed application areas. So we have agriculture, cross-cutting disasters, eco-forecasting, energy, health and air quality, urban development, water resources, and transportation. So every one of our projects will fall under one of these thematic application areas. And there are 3 capacity building programs within NASA. There's RSET, Develop, and Severe. So I'll just be talking about Develop. If you want to know more about the other programs, feel free to come and ask me after the presentation. So what is Develop? Like I said before, Develop is a capacity building program. So what does that mean? Our motto is bridging the gap between science and society. So we not only build capacity in our team members and our interns that we bring on to conduct these projects, we're also building capacity in the groups that we partner with and the decision makers, because we're offering them something that they might not be able to provide for themselves. So where is Develop? We have 12 nodes all over the country. It differs from node to node. Some of these nodes are located at actual NASA facilities like Langley, JPL, Goddard. And then we also have some locations like number 6 in Arizona, that's on ASU's campus in the Urban Climate Research Center. And our node in Asheville, we're with NOAA in the Climate Monitoring Branch in the National Center for Environmental Evaluation. So our location specifically is the largest repository of climate data in the United States. Okay, so a little bit about our projects. The general characteristics of the projects. Every project highlights the applications and capabilities of NASA Earth science and Earth observations. And each project addresses a certain community concerns or multiple community concerns. So we like to start with a problem and partner with the decision makers faced with that problem, and then the projects kind of flesh out from there. So yeah, like I said, we partner with organizations who can benefit from the data, and we enhance their decision-making process. So the research is conducted by interdisciplinary teams. So we like to put together teams with a diverse educational background, because then we're going to get new ideas that we might not have gotten if we had, 4 climatologists on one project. And each project, aside from the actual research and the work and whatever they hand off to the partners, all the participants are also tasked with making a set of deliverables. So some of these deliverables are a project summary, a technical report. Some of these technical reports actually end up getting published. They also have a poster and presentation and a project video. So this is interesting because a lot of our participants have never had to make a video before. And they're given this short 10-week time frame, and they have to learn how to use a video editor and squeeze this in and put something out in 10 weeks. Yeah, so some of these deliverables, these are mainly outwardly facing, and they're geared towards communicating the science to the public, because if nobody knows what you've done, then you've only done that. Now it's working again.
You did.
Okay, so just to give you an example, I'm going to go over the project that I worked on this last summer, the Las Cruces Health and Air Quality Project. I was the team lead on this project. This was at the Arizona node. So we were assessing urban heat as it relates to social vulnerability and land use change in the city of Las Cruces, New Mexico. So our study area, of course, included the city limits for the city of Las Cruces. We tried to, we were going to look at the area around the city as well, but because of the short time frame, sometimes that's a limiting factor, and processing times, we tried to keep the study area down as much as we could. So the city kind of had a massive period of urban growth in the early 2000s. So in order to capture this change, we decided to look at all the years from 1999 to 2016. One thing to keep in mind, though, is we used Landsat 5 and 8 data, and there was a gap in our data in 2012 because Landsat 7, which is the one that kind of bridged the gap between Landsat 5 and Landsat 8, had a banding issue, and an instrument actually broke on it. So there's a horizontal band that went, conveniently right over the city of Las Cruces, so we couldn't use it. So the community concerns, basically, it's really hot there, and there's a lot of impervious surfaces. Not a lot of tree cover. A lot of the houses don't have proper insulation. And for at-risk populations, those with poor health, people with diabetes suffer a lot in the heat. This is really not a good situation to be living in. They're really just baking. And the thing about all the impervious surfaces in the urban heat island is that all those impervious surfaces, they trap the heat. And when the rest of the surrounding area cools down at night, even in the summer, but the impervious surfaces in the city doesn't cool down as much. So when people can't cool down at night, then it kind of adds up, and over time, they become more and more susceptible to heat stroke. So the Earth observations we used for this project were Landsat 5 and Landsat 8. Landsat 5 went from 1999 to 2011, Landsat 8, 2013 to 2016. So these were mainly used for our land surface temperature estimations. So this is the solution we came up with. So the data we used Landsat data. We used native aerial imagery for our actual classification because it's at a 1 meter resolution, and Landsat data is at a 30 meter resolution, so we can get much more accurate classification. And we also added in American Community Survey data from the Census Bureau and CDC data. So we created a land surface temperature time series, social vulnerability layers, urban tree canopy cover, and impervious surface cover. And we use these for our heat vulnerability analysis. So since I'm running out of time,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll skip through some of this since we're running out of time, but feel free to come and ask me if you want to know the details of how we calculated land surface temperature or did our classification or our principal component analysis for the social variables. So basically, once we had the land surface temperature, social vulnerability, impervious, and tree canopy cover, we combined all of these maps to create an overall heat vulnerability map. And we also made multiple maps with more specific categories, so our partners in the city could look at certain aspects of heat vulnerability a little more closely. And in the end, we ended up creating a web app that they could use, and they can, click on and off all the layers that we created, so they can look and see, where they might want to introduce a cool corridor and introduce some green stormwater infrastructure, and basically plant some trees for shade. So some common majors we get are geography, environmental science, and computer science mainly. Our summer term, the application window opens in January and closes in February. And we have paid and volunteer positions. So we have 3 terms every year, one in the spring, summer, and fall. And here's some eligibility requirements. You have to be 18 and up with a 3.0 GPA. Some locations you have to be a U.S. citizen, but some locations you don't. It's mainly the the federal locations that you do just to be able to build it. So follow us on social media, and that's all I've got. Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question. I'm so very proud. Can you tell us a little bit about your major and how you got the internship with them, and what were the skills that got you?
I'm actually an anthropology major, which is very uncommon for the NASA Develop program. And I started out with GIS for archaeology. I had an archaeology professor, Dr. Vogel, who needed some maps made, and getting the internship with Patricia here at the center. And everything I know with GIS was learned right here in the center, and that's what provided the springboard for me to come into the NASA Develop program.
Can we play Gigi? So Jonathan created Gigi, and we just want to run Gigi just 1 second. Do we have volume? Can we get volume? Gigi's not the same without volume, but
Oh, we need to hear Gigi.
yeah. Like, can we set it? Oh, there.
Crank Gigi.
Sorry. We should run this at the very beginning.
I also picked up some Photoshop and Adobe.
He made it. He made this. Just an anecdote, like Jonathan was also our marketing, social media. You saw how he didn't know anything about creative videos, and he created those. So when he got the internship at NASA, and then we just find out his team developed lead, he's the lead, and it's all these skills that he had that, you know, they were climate scientists, engineering, computer science, and he, from anthropology background, was the team lead at NASA. And I think, you know, how he took all these challenges that we gave him here at Clemson. We're very, very proud to have him back. So. Oh, and sorry, one more thing. He's in the booth there, so he can answer any questions about internships that you might have. Any questions? We want to have more students from Clemson coming to NASA and to these programs. We also want to thank Clemson Geopaths. They're in that corner. They have a really cool programs to bring non-STEM students into the geosciences. They're giving tours on the sandbox and the Vibe. We also have Clemson Mappers, and we have Esri and Esri representative too. So within breaks, and when we put the big break, please make sure that you get to talk to all of them about job internships and opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Wayne Sarasua, an associate professor of civil engineering here at Clemson.
It's tough to follow Gigi, but I'll try. Patricia recommended like
10 slides in 10 minutes. I have 60. So I'm going to show you a real lightning talk. Basically, this is over 20 years of work, more like 25. GIS and transportation, me and my students from A to Z. Hey, air quality. Why was it Georgia Tech that worked on a mobile emissions model to model emissions, taking data like traffic data and land use data? And here's just a map of nitrous oxide pollutants and AM peak hour. B, buffers. We've done a lot with buffers over the years. I tried doing this, driveway buffers. We're looking at driveway analysis. We'll talk more about this. Some other cool buffers. SDOT has a centerline map for the state. We also have distances as an attribute, so we did a variable distance buffer in ArcGIS. And you can see areas with their, problems with their buffers, and so problems with their right of way. So but in the GIS, it's very easy to fix. C, crashes. Done a lot of work with crashes over the years. The police in South Carolina, they used to use GPS to geocode crashes. There would be a crash, and they'd code the scene, and they'd use their GPS, and they write down the coordinates, but they weren't very good with precision. So many of our crashes occurred in the Atlantic Ocean and other states. now it's all GIS based. The GPS gets them close. And another thing about the way it used to be is even when you got it right, the crashes would occur in parking lots where they filled out the reports. Now they can use pin mapping in the GIS to get it right, and you can see it's a lot better for analysis. D, dynamic graphics. EDS, Ross Perot's company, had a software called GDS years ago, and we built a dynamic engine over this to do dynamic graphics, and we had instrumented vehicles in Atlanta. And as it moves through the network, we can monitor their emissions and such. And we can create strip maps of the vehicle going in Richmond where it overpowers the catalytic converter. East Coast Greenway, me and a buddy at Citadel, we helped develop the routes for the East Coast Greenway, which is the urban Appalachian Trail here in South Carolina. We use GIS and bicycle suitability indexes to create these, the routes. F, football, Bowden Bowl, 2003. Guess what's missing? This is 3 o'clock in the morning. My students and I were doing traffic for football, and we won that game. And so, of course, we had to do something nasty like tear down goalposts. I was on a scissor lift at Williamson in 93 monitoring traffic when the goalpost took a right turn and went towards College Avenue. And I think it ended up in a fraternity. But one of the things we did, we monitored traffic in GIS. That was like the first time they ever closed College Avenue after the game because of pedestrian surges. So you can see the volume on that College Avenue weren't very high. A couple of years ago, we recommended that they do that permanently. So after the games now, we have closed College Avenue for pedestrians, and also that actually helps traffic, believe it or not. G, geocoding. I got in trouble with my students. We used a lot of GIS. Okay, I won't talk about it. But we geocoded actually twice, 781,000 twice, because he got partway in and thought it blew up, and so we did it twice. And we did it online, and so I think we got a bill for like $40,000. It's so crazy. But anyway, so we geocoded all these crashes. We're risky drivers for using address matching. Anyway, and we'll come back to this. But these are where bad drivers are. And yeah, it's a map of South Carolina. Here's a few bad drivers in the middle of lakes and Savannah River. This is something I did back in 1995. Actually, we wanted to know where cars were, so I got a database of all the vehicles in Georgia, and we mapped them. We were interested in the older vehicles because they were the bigger pollutants. Hitchcock, transportation problem. Going back to football, we geocoded where football ticket holders were from around the country, and where they would come in, to the stadium. And what we're trying to do is do an algorithm, a logistics algorithm that will optimize where they park based on where they live, so we don't have people driving through campus, park on that side. Cheap way of helping traffic. ITS. Cities from across the country use GIS as part of their ITS. Here, this is Atlanta. It's showing green, so this must be the middle of the night. I think it's actually Sunday morning, and it's showing that speeds on the roads. But also, you can get online and you can click on cameras or signs and find out information that's there. J, spatial join. Remember those buffers in B? Well, what we did was we overlaid those buffers with crashes to associate crashes with driveways for driveway accessibility analysis, access management. K, Kite Hill, I sent a student with GPS walking around campus from different parking lots to the football stadium. And here, this shows a map between walking through Clemson Beach, the football stadium, and Kite Hill. The distance is about the same. L, LiDAR, point cloud. Where are we? We've had LiDAR now for a number of years. This is actually about 10 years ago. We have a single LiDAR unit that we mounted to our research van, and we collected data with it. And this is just on campus. More recently, though, we've been using mobile LiDAR to collect data on the cross slope of roadways, because cross slope is one way of helping to prevent hydroplaning potential. And this is a 10 in ArcMap created from a LiDAR data. And multimodal planning. While I was at Georgia Tech, I worked on a multimodal planning tool. And you get information for all the different counties. This is transit data and airport data, and yes, even traffic data. And network analysis. There's an urban legend that most of your crashes occur within 5 miles of your home. We proved it. And so what we did was, it wasn't as the crow flies, but it was through the network. So we overlaid this with where those risky drivers were and where their crashes occurred, and we were able to analyze this. Oh, overlay. And yeah, so here, this is very similar to spatial join, but we looked at corner clearance. Driveways near intersections are bad. Okay, and we've proved that from a safety standpoint. Using cool buffers and overlays. P, parking. One of the graduates of our program in civil engineering went to work for parking services and created a parking GIS. He got married and now he works down in Augusta. But he used GPS to collect all the parking spots all over campus. Q, queries. A spatial query, you can do that with Excel and Access. But what you can't do is spatial queries. And here we're looking at crashes within the enrollment areas of Pekin High School. R, risky drivers. So with that risky driver data, we created heat maps, other types of maps. Here is showing incidents of risky drivers per 1,000 population. The red areas have the highest incidence of those. And if you look at cluster analysis, you can look at areas of significantly low numbers of risky drivers versus significantly high numbers of risky drivers, normalized. S, segmentation. I'm going pretty fast. S, segmentation. One of the projects I worked on when I first got to Clemson is we looked at the reflectivity of pavement marking. There's glass beads in the markings which shine light back to the source. And we had different types of devices, handheld devices and laser devices to collect that data. And we made an application to GIS to display this information. Lots of noise in that data, so we had a multi-criteria system where we can actually we can smooth the data. This is actually a GIS application we just developed that presented that data. And we can create thematic maps that, depending on how you zoom in, you can look at different resolutions on the fly. T, transit. One of the things I worked on before the Olympics is the transit system in Atlanta. Here we had dynamic graphics. We show buses as they're driving through the network with different status, depending on if they're behind schedule or if they're hijacked or something like that. Here, this is we created a bus stop database. I had multiple students working for me doing research, collecting. The first few bus stops you collect is research. Then the other 10,000 were very redundant. N, UVWXYZ. Those are letters for future research. Thank you.
Wow.
I should have left my animation. It took me 10 minutes and 30 seconds last night, so I took out some animation, but I should have left it in. I'm on caffeine, what can I say?
Any questions for Dr. Sarso? Yes, you have a question.
How did you collect all the data? Like risky drivers and
okay. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So there's numerous sources. Actually, the risky drivers was pretty easy because we use state databases, and we have to the whole thing is getting permission to use them. That's the key thing, because there's confidentiality stuff that we have to deal with, you know. And when we geocoded them, we were not allowed to geocode them by address, but we could use 9-digit zip, which hits you within about 50 feet. So it's pretty close. It's close enough, you know. It's amazing how close 9-digit zip is. And so, and they said, yeah, you can do that. I go, sure now. Well, I'm still going to argue with them. And so, yeah. But yeah, there's it depends on the source. There's many ways to collect data. I think you all are aware.
Would you get the overall data?
For you're talking about for crashes?
Yeah.
Yeah, the crashes come from well, we get it from South Carolina DOT, but we can get it from DPS. And so in other words, it's a state database. The crash data is yeah, we have all the crashes up through 2016 now, because we have another study that we're doing right now.
And if anybody needs geocoding help, come to us if you have more than 10,000.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I didn't do that, and I got in trouble. But so Jack Dangerman knows who I am.
I mean, you just went through A through what's before you? T.
Yeah.
So A through T, it's a bunch of different projects. Is there any kind of data warehouse that Clemson has? I mean, because each of them probably requires slightly different, and some is confidential, some is public. And
yeah, I think most of the stuff is on my computer, and hard drives. So they're very application specific, but a lot of it's very useful, and a lot of them from different databases. Some from Georgia, of course. But
So,
I just want to mention though that to me, GIS is like, just it's like should be part of Microsoft Office. It's like just another thing. It's like, oh, I need to use GIS. I need to use CAD or whatever, and so that's what it's been.
we didn't pay him to say this.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I want to mention is that we have Rachel Wingman. She's a metadata library specialist, but she's also our metadata person for GIS. So if there's any data that you think we should preserve, we also work, she's part of the Clemson, the Digital Library Services. We have, a small initiative that we started, like we purchased some crime data, for example, because we had a need from a few faculty, GIS data for us to preserve. We can start looking at doing the same thing, and that's part of the mission of the center being part of the libraries. And so we can talk to you more and say, can we preserve this data? And I think there's some initiatives also for the Clemson Caribbean Initiative. They have a lot of data for Dominica, and we've been talking about, how to preserve it, create metadata, and then make it accessible.
Now, even just a list of what those are would be helpful for researchers to actually stimulate ideas and collaboration.
One of the things that we do have is the state route database for the state that's managed by the SDOT. It's a little bit different, using mile markers and things like that. That's right. But it could be another layer or feed coverage, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. We have one more presentation before a short break. Our next speaker is Dr. John Daver, who is professor and chair of city and regional planning at Clemson.
Thank you very much for having me. Today is one of those days where I wish I had a longer name, so it'd take up more time for me to speak, but oh well. So I'm going to start off with this talk with the idea of who's on first, what's on second, I don't know on third. So this is a famous Abbott Costello skit. Does anybody not know Abbott Costello? Oh, okay, that dates me. But the idea would be is I am a certified city planner, and I've done a lot of consulting and research with city planning using GIS as a way to make decisions. And what's unique about GIS is that at the end of the day, it really is a unique way of organizing data, both spatial data and non-spatial data. But when a lot of times when city planners make decisions, they really are not making complete accurate decisions because not everybody is on the exact same page, especially when we come into situations of city planning. City planning, in terms of the government function, has largely a foundation based on something known as police powers. Police powers is an interesting world where you have a unique combination of a function of democracy, where politics come into play, as well as a combination in terms of being able to preserve the health, safety, and well-being of others based upon empirical decisions. And a lot of times when we engage in a democratic process in terms of local city government, not everybody in the community has a really good geographic understanding of what is where. And so GIS as a tool is a great way of opportunity for local government or city planners to use geo-reference data to have everybody in the community be on the exact same page. Classic example of this is that I was working on a research project in a state called Nebraska. There was a big awareness in Nebraska, especially in this one town called Lincoln, Nebraska, where there was an awareness that there was a high number of refugees in the community, but they weren't exactly sure. No one knew the data, and what they knew about the data was basically they kind of had an understanding in terms of large numbers of refugees, but didn't have an understanding in terms of where they were located. Through GIS, we were able to situate where all the refugees were resettled, as well as where refugees went to school, as well as where we had refugees working in local businesses. And so when we had this conversation in the city of Lincoln, Nebraska, there was this understanding in terms of what is the refugee issue? Where are the refugees located? And what are we going to do in terms of how do we get the refugees integrated with our local community? Through GIS, we were able to combine all this geo-reference data to come up with a new understanding in terms of what is where. And in this particular case, this was the development of a refugee zoning overlay zone to identify a multi-ethnic refugee market, which combined changes in zoning code as well as changes in terms of housing options to facilitate a multi-ethnic market. So I tell you the story is to highlight the idea, and which is mine is that non-spatial talk on GIS, is that GIS is a very powerful tool on how we can make decisions using data, where we're all able to make decisions based on data that are all in the exact same location. That if we didn't have GIS data, we would basically be all over the map in terms of not knowing exactly what is where. So I'll conclude my talk, which will be way ahead of time and gets us all out to our break earlier, is the idea of thinking of GIS as something more than just a mapping system. Thinking of GIS as an opportunity to combine multiple data sets in a conversation so we all can be on the exact same page when we make decisions, especially at local government levels. With that being said, any questions?
Data that you were talking about for Nebraska, it just seems like GIS people always use their power for good, right?
Yes.
But that data, it seems to me, could be used in such a way to be harmful to people, to perpetuate fear and stereotypes and things like that. How do you all in the community deal with things like that?
It depends. Well, the key is how you represent the data. Okay. So you're not going to use pinpoint data, you're going to use cluster data. So you're not going to show the exact location where refugees actually live per household, but you can show it within a 3-block area. So in order to preserve the autonomy of the individual, we represented data in clusters. Now, you could argue saying, wow, gee, this is a really big area where a lot of refugees are located. Well, it wouldn't take a brain surgeon to figure that out. You just walk down the street. So it wasn't necessarily an issue in terms of showing something new that exposed someone in terms of their vulnerability. But what it did do is it showed the overlapping of lots of bits of different understandings in terms of where refugees live, where refugees went to school, where were their ethnic businesses, and come up with a new understanding in terms of what is going on in this area. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Really specific. How did they gather that data?
Oh, it was actually quite easy. So if you understand anything about refugees, well, there's obviously the High Command for Refugee Resettlement. There is the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Refugee resettlement is a process that combines government and non-government organizations. So you identify a series of refugees, non-government agencies such as Catholic Social Services will have to put a call out for being able to resettle refugees. In order to be able to resettle refugees, refugee resettling organizations have to provide a series of resources for refugees, such as affordable housing, all these sort of things. And part of that issue in terms of affordable housing, they have to identify where the refugees will be initially resettled in the first place. So I was able to get refugee data from a series of resettlement organizations in the Lincoln, Nebraska area, and do it over time and have it from a country of origin, and then print that out, that information. I then cross-analyze that data in terms of refugees, in terms of them showing up in terms of schools, in terms of school children data. And then I combine it with field research observations where we're able to geo-reference ethnic businesses in terms of Vietnamese stores or Asian markets, and then put that on the map, and then did an overlay to identify a multi-ethnic refugee resettlement community. And it was also useful because by having multiple data sets, we're able to understand why this community developed in terms of, it became really clear in terms of the chicken and egg scenario. Do ethnic marketplaces, do they develop from just the market, or do they develop as a function in terms of where people live and the walkability? And it was the latter of the case. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for your time and enjoy your parade.
Thank you. One other thing, we have a lot of people from the planning department and also from cities and counties. Do you mind standing up 1 second so we can acknowledge you if you belong to the planning department, or to a city or a county? And please, thank you for being here. Thank you. Can you say where you're from? And so we'll start with you, Dr. Spencer. Where
Well, we
you're
weren't
from?
sure if you're talking about planning
well,
Clemson
you-
or planning
everybody
your
related.
city.
Yes.
Because there's a whole crew of
Yes,
planning faculty here.
Can we
Well,
acknowledge
I'm
this
Jim
one?
Spencer, Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Education in Architecture.
I'm Brendan Hansley, and I'm the transportation planner with Greenville County and the Greenville Ticket Study.
Look at me, I didn't.
Oh, you did. Okay, thank you.
Tim Green, Assistant Professor of City and Regional Planning here at Clemson.
Okay.
Mickey Laurie, Director of Planning Design and the Built Environment PhD program and member of the City and Regional Planning.
Dean Knudsen with University of Planning and Design here at Clemson University.
Anybody else? Yep.
Natalia Rosario, I am the city planner for the city.
Dr. Sperry?
Graduate.
I'm retired.
Louis?
Louis Lascelles, space planner.
Right. So we are very happy to have you all here, and your talk was perfect because we have a lot of presents. So thank you very much. Okay, so we're gonna have a 10 minutes break. We'll be back here at 3:10. Please talk to our exhibitors. We really want to thank Clemson U, Pats, all of our interns, Blake, Ellie. We also want to thank NASA and Nesri. Jonathan is there if you have any questions. We might have some coffee and cookies left. Last time to sign it and choose your favorite map gallery and all of the content. The 3D contest is almost done. I think there's still 2 more entries. I would like the planning department to maybe ask the judges if you would like to judge the top since we have you here. And then we'll just be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
I think we need more of the designers.
So I think there are 2 more entries. So and some of them are, like this is from 13 years old, and some of them from children. So we need to.
Somebody make a decision, right?
Would like to make a decision.
How long ago?
I'm not sure I will be here. Right, okay.
And then we do prizes. So you get to list the best part. It's really good. That's the kind of stuff we need to identify. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you might want to put that. I believe so.
Something that, you know, because it's really, it was like I'm completely open to
Yes, if I can carry it around, as long as I can see the roof, I'd be okay.
Yeah. But again, it's a place where you're going to get people from experience.
You saw that email that I sent about the whole guy. And especially because the improvements were but then because you will get somebody from a client perspective into the interview to talk about it with real experience and the good connection there. Yeah, I know. He would be a perfect from funny. No, I don't. Well, let me do the class. That's my biggest goal right now. I'm very excited about that class. But I think, I don't know, I was invited to go to Indiana for GIS Day on Thursday, and one of the topics they wanted to talk about was the GIS. So I'm, you know, I think, and it will be very powerful but I want to bring it to planning, not engineering or civil. I really want to bring it because it's an ultimate challenge from a planning perspective. Yeah.
Nobody feels nothing about my question. I agree 100%. This is the thing that I'll start here. However, all technology is working on radio
And I think, you know, having this space.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Well, when you don't have power wireless, that radio becomes waste. There are things, you know, and so I just think there's a lot of potential and there's a little bit of a turnaround that we're going Transportation department constantly asking us to the data on the buses. We felt like we are not the transportation department. We need a screenshot for us, but then somehow they got elevated they wanted the data, and so right. And it comes back to collaboration and also data repository, what you're saying, and we are not there yet.
You gotta have one
Have you seen the entries on the map? You have a few minutes late.
Really about products that Patricia can offer. And this,
Patricia.
this stuff takes
40 hours for three of those.
Oh, yeah. No, but there are whole consulting shops that are set up to do physical models. This big map, but you have the capacity to sell it. They would love to have a shelf downtown. We have that 3D printing over in the lab. I just saw it in the one innovation center. Yeah. Yeah, I think they're usually. But that's what I was bringing. Where'd you get that? Oh, yeah. See, they printed a bunch. Some of us had to go to these.
Yeah, you're.
That's it. No time. That would be amazing.
This one's very simple. Your favorite
Oh, okay. Around the yeah.
Interactive story maps.
Okay. Sure. Is this my slide advancer? Does it have a high tech here? Yeah. Yeah, sure. I guess are you gonna wrangle the humans?
Your academics or something.
Oh, yeah, no, that's why I wanted to use it. I'm about to sit down and
Have everyone's attention? We're going to get started on our next set of speakers. So everyone be quiet down. Well, afterwards.
Yeah, right. I know how these things go.
We're going to get started on our next set of speakers. Everyone can sit down. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Timothy Green,
Everybody, we're about to get started once again. Come on, take a seat. We're going to start our next round of talk.
Excuse me. Everybody, we have our next speaker. Can everybody sit down for our next speaker, Dr. Green?
Oh, it is. I get lost.
Oh, there
it goes. There it goes.
All right.
Ellie?
Thank you, everyone. Our next speaker is Dr. Timothy Green, who is an assistant professor of city and regional planning at Clemson. Dr. Green.
Thank you. Sorry, now it's going to have to be a better talk because it stopped all from your side conversations and getting food and everything. So try to make it worth your time. So I'm just going to talk briefly. Timothy Green, I'm assistant professor in city and regional planning here at Clemson in the Department of City Planning and Real Estate Development. To give a shout out to our real estate colleagues who are here as well. I realize we spoke earlier. But I've been working in GIS for 15 years in various capacities and stuff. So I'm just going to share kind of some of my approaches to it and why I think it's a useful tool. And so I'm teaching a class that I'll plug at the end here to our planning students. Go.
Oh.
Do it.
Just click here.
Move? Oh, there. That takes that movement. Yep, that's what does it. Okay. I see GIS as a tool. People talk about it, it's a research method. And GIS is a tool. It's a whole set of tools that lets us do all kinds of stuff. I think one of the great things about it is that it lets you do really, really complicated things that combine vast, enormous, crazy data sets. So this is an example of that, of my own work, which was working with something called the Mid-America Earthquake Center in Memphis, looking at the little-known New Madrid Fault that had the biggest earthquake ever on record in North America back 200 years ago. And what this was a project, kind of classic GIS, combining data that was put together by an engineering team, civil engineers looking at peak ground acceleration and peak ground velocity and various kinds of sinusoidal waves moving through soils of different types and things that I know absolutely nothing about, which I am summarizing with this one single squished map right here. That represents a lot. To that, and this was part of a project that was designed to understand the impacts of natural disasters potentially, but to include not only those physical characteristics of soil and ground type and things like that, but also the socioeconomic structure that we inhabit on top of that. And so this top map here is actually a map of 19,000 point locations of businesses that I can tell you about how hard it is to get that later. But that had information on business size and business sector that we did some economic analysis of, ran it through some models to look for reliance upon local customers versus customers far away, and suppliers that were local versus suppliers far away in size and volume of business and stuff, to kind of estimate a vulnerability, not so much from the physical shaking perspective, but actually physical or vulnerability from the socioeconomic, financial economic perspective. And then we combined these into this big model and developed this index. And then at the end of it, this is only one of the tiny outputs, but it kind of pulls out the businesses that are the most vulnerable and the least vulnerable. And this is, the culmination of years and years of work, of which I only, did a small part of. There are other outputs as well. But this is your kind of big classic GIS project that kind of using GIS to integrate physical, socioeconomic data to answer this big complicated question about vulnerability. GIS is, in my opinion, just as useful for illustrating simpler problems that sometimes people just aren't aware of. And so this is a map I put together as part of some work down in the South Carolina Promise Zone, which is this area. This area, can I use it? Is it working? This area down here, around Barnwell, Allendale, excuse me. Looking at redevelopment in what's been a persistently underinvested in, impoverished area of the state. And the reason I put this map together was to answer a question that is of great interest to planners and kind of completely off the radar probably for most people, which is who's the right regional development agency, regional economic policy organization that ought to be coordinating this kind of work. And one of the things that we do in planning is kind of look at how these organizations relate to one another. This is a map looking at the two main kinds of organizations of that type that exist in South Carolina, one being councils of governments, or COGS. The other being economic development alliances, which are state-sponsored public-private partnerships. And what this map shows is that these two types of organizations, there's absolutely no coordination of any kind between them. The bright colored areas are the alliances, showing the areas of the state represented by each. There's even one that actually represents a separate area over here that's not contiguous with the rest of it. The black lines are actually showing you where the COGS are, and this was just kind of a quick way to show that this area right here, which is kind of the core of the area that was under consideration for redevelopment under this Promise Zone program, it's actually completely unclear who ought to lead that program. There are three different alliances. There are at least 2 or 3 COGS that are there. And this is not a highly technical exercise by any means, right? This is just like a simple map with 2 layers on it. But it kind of illustrates a classic problem, which is that when we want to do regional level policy coordination in the United States, we're oftentimes really at a loss to find the right organization to do that, and there is no clear one to step forward. And as soon as we try to wade into that, we get all kinds of turf battles between these different organizations, and that's not, I'm going to say what happened in this case, but you could argue it kind of happened probably behind the scenes. So GIS is a tool for both of these things, and I see it very much that way, is that sometimes it's highly technical, and sometimes it's, you know, this amazing sort of combination of different data sets and complicated, sophisticated models, and sometimes it's making a kind of a simple map just to push home a point that is best illustrated through spatial data. So I just want to then show you, so we do a year-long project at the end of the master's students in planning curriculum, where we have them go and do kind of a self-guided research project. And I just want to show you 2 from last year that I thought were kind of cool that use GIS data sets. So this was one, this is Ben Abdo, who's a graduate of our program from last year. And Ben was looking at the issue of access to jobs in Greenville County, or by Greenville County residents. And he was able to hook them up with a newer census data base. Those of you that are looking around for interesting data projects to use. The LEHD, or Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics database, or data set, is a very interesting data set that has as its unit of observation job flows, meaning each row in the database is actually a worker, and it has information very spatially specific, which I will tell you is, if you want to get into the details, it's modeled. It's not actually like anyone goes and collects this data one by one, but it's still a good data product. It tells you with some specificity down to the census block group level where this person lives, where they actually work, which one of 3 major sectors they work in, which one of 3 different income levels they are earning, age, and a few other things. And so Ben was looking at where is it exactly that the jobs are in the area, the metropolitan Greenville area, and where do Greenville residents live, and then breaking that down by different socioeconomic characteristics, and looking at using GIS network analysts then to develop a travel time estimate for all of these different places. And he's able to come up with some statistics about sort of average travel time to start to break that down by socioeconomic group, by job type, and things like that. So it's just it's an interesting example of taking a publicly available data set and starting to investigate a sort of classic problem, which is who has access to jobs, of what kind of jobs, and things like that. And the second one that I just wanted to point out that I think was an interesting project is one by another graduate student of ours who just graduated, June Peng, and she was looking at public service delivery, and she was using a theory called central place theory, which is very, very abstract. And in planning classes, you're required to talk about it, and it's really interesting, and it has lots of hexagons in it, but it's very hard to actually apply. The math starts to get rather crazy rather quickly. But using some basic, again, actually in this case, network analysis tools, overlaying data with socioeconomic data, demographic data, what she was looking at was where are there currently existing fire stations in Los Angeles? Kind of a classic GIS, right? You can imagine service areas. Let's be a GIS nerd, which is a good thing. Right? I'm a GIS nerd. Looking at where those fire stations are covering, and using some thresholds on how long or how far away are people supposed to be from a fire station, what are the maximums, how well is the city doing, City of Los Angeles doing in terms of its coverage, who's overrepresented, who's overcovered, who's undercovered, and then even better than that, starting to use a couple of optimization models to optimize coverage by different things, like optimize the most people with the fewest stations, optimize by covering the most amount of people with the least cost, and a couple of different scenarios like that. And through some fairly straightforward GIS analysis, was able to experiment with different scenarios of pulling a station out, where should we add a new station, and how would that improve or decrease the coverage and thereby the fire protection of the people in the area. These are both examples of things that students can do rather, I don't want to say easily because it's a ton of work, but you can do this kind of stuff. These data sets are out there, and you know, GIS makes this kind of stuff possible. And that's kind of, I see the value of it is that, you know, in planning, we are very interdisciplinary, and we are called upon sometimes to answer questions about environment and housing at the same time as economic development, at the same time as transportation. And GIS is one way that we can really relatively easily integrate all of those things and ask sort of complicated questions about what exactly kind of people are getting good fire coverage in the city of Los Angeles, or how close are higher paying jobs to lower income people in Greenville County in a way that's digestible by a lot of people. So I'm happy to give more detail on any of those if I still have time, but I think I'm probably out of time. So thank you very much. And sorry, my last slide is my plug. I know there are wonderful educational resources available to us here through the center. But we do in planning have a class, Introduction to GIS for Planning and Policy, that we're teaching every year. So if anyone wants more info on that, it's being taught now, it'll be taught next year as well. Happy to answer. Okay, now.
One question for Dr. Green?
All right, overwhelming.
Yeah. You explained it all.
doubt that.
Our next speaker is Natalia Rosario. She is Senior Planner for Planning and Zoning at the City of Spartanburg and a Clemson graduate.
Yes, 2016 NCRP, Dr. Lori was my chair, Brennan and Ellie were my cohort, part of my cohorts. So I am the senior planner, the only planner, the GIS tech, the data gatherer. I am all things planning for the city of Spartanburg. So as part of my daily life, I like memes, and being a GIS analyst really includes all of this stuff. I just include a lot of memes because I try to make people laugh. But generally, the longest time, and hardest thing about the GIS is actually getting your plotter to work. I don't know if it's like that here, but it's definitely like that in Spartanburg. So think out. Go next. So both planner and GIS tech, those are both me. When I deliver for myself, I'm so happy because it takes a long time. I'm not an expert. What I do is a whole lot more simple than what Dr. Green just explained, and much murkier as well. So I manage data citywide, which is a struggle. Because I am the only one, and we have had no data management prior to me being there. So I gather all the data I can. I produce maps for all of our departments except for police and fire, and all of the nonprofits in the county, because I'm the only person who'll do it for free, and it got me a board seat. So do stuff for free. As part of that, I analyze data for patterns, locations, parcel information, which I'll get into in a second. I talk really fast, and my talk is probably going to be over in like 2 minutes. And I manage land use zoning, which is essentially what you can and can't do on a property. I've got a really long boring slide on that. So in terms of data management, inside all of these folders are so many shape files and so much data, it would overwhelm you and kill your computer. I serve as a repository and manager for all things data. So everyone always comes to me and say, hey, do you have this impossible kind of data? Because I imagine that you do. And I'm like, no, I don't have anything. I just have this stuff that I found. So keeper of the keys, I'm, again, get asked a lot of questions, get asked to make tons of maps, which I enjoy, even though it takes me all day. Organization is key. This looks as if I have it together. This next slide is what my actual working map looks like as of today. It's bad. Dr. Sperry is like, what are you doing? Why is this? My life is fast-paced. I got to get it however I can. But anyway, so this is kind of what at least me as a planner, what my workstation looks like. So zoning and quadrants for aerials, etc. And so some of the next, do the next. Go, do it. Okay, so everybody needs maps. when using GIS. I have no idea what I'm doing. So some of the examples that I'm going to show are heat maps that I've done for code enforcement. A lot of what I do goes back to council members to explain to them why and how we do what we do, and also why we can't spend more money on what they want. As well as impacted property maps for speed bump locations. You'd be surprised how many people want to fight with their neighbors about speed bumps, so we have to do a whole lot of data and public meetings, which we have one coming up on Monday in one of our most affluent neighborhoods. It's going to be so much fun. As well as just making maps for grant applications. Government wants to know what you're doing where. And practice makes perfect. I learned so much more from my actual practice in GIS and actually trying to give people what they ask me for, that I actually feel competent during GIS here. Ellie and Dr. Sperry taught me, actually. Ellie's a genius. That's why she's doing this right now. But I really had no idea what I was doing. So basically, people asking me to do random stuff has helped me learn, including next is heat map. I threw all this on here because I felt like it. But anyway, so this map is, I don't guess concatenated would be the right word. But anyway, all of the code enforcement actions against properties were in a point form. I got it into a hotspot map for several years, which was presented to council. And here's a glimpse into like working for the government, how bureaucracy works. We spent an entire year off of this data trying to come up with a rental registry in order to get absentee landowners to be more responsible about their properties. But at the end of the day, council decided that it was too controversial and nothing happened. So it's a wasted year. We'll try again. This one right here is a speed hump / bump / whatever. They've got 1,000 names for traffic calming items. Pretty simple. It's basically just affected parcels and 500 feet out. But that's just an example of what the residents will see on Monday, so they can understand who's impacted, where they live, which is kind of my next point. And that's our choice grant application. If any of you have any pull with the federal government at HUD, contact them, tell them to give us money. Highland is my pet project. I did my TP on that neighborhood and ready to get someone, hopefully. Okay, so this is an example just using county data, and this was a request from a council member who wanted to know why we couldn't spend more money on economic development things on Union Street, which is a pretty much industrial older street in town. So this right here is the assessment. So essentially what the tax assessment is for each parcel, and this is the building condition. So for the most part, it's all garbage. So essentially we're focusing elsewhere until we have enough money to make this work, which was our answer to her. And I've actually never heard back what she thought of that. So, so zoning, just gonna show you my zoning map next. It's the only thing that I love. So I don't know how much I should go into this, but essentially zoning determines what kind of land uses can go where, happen where, next to what, and how. So we have form-based and Euclidean. Look at all this form-based stuff, and the rest of it is Euclidean. It's so confusing. Look at all of our zoning categories and our overlays. Put my heart in some exclusively. Okay, next. Do it. So it's an instrumental tool. It does inform decision making to the extent that people will listen to actual real data, which isn't common apparently anymore on any level of government. I use it daily just for simple information gathering. People call me and ask me, what's this parcel, what's this address, blah, blah, blah. It allows us to create critical visuals for public meetings. So good planning is only done with community input. Otherwise, you will have people very angry at you for implementing historic standards in 2008 when only 10 people agreed to it, but council voted for it as well. But we didn't use maps or have public meetings for that. And the community has to understand their physical environment and speak to it before they can speak to you about what they want to see. So it wildly increases our capacity for prior years in terms of the way that we make maps, use maps. And it can be a pain, but I think it's absolutely critical. With every planner, I probably spend about 40% of my time at work doing something on GIS. This is a picture of a gigantic zoning map from 1991. Apparently, before we used GIS in Spartanburg, it is sitting in my office and taking up half of it. So that is my talk, my lightning talk. GIS is cool, right? Gene Wilder. That's me. And that's what I do with GIS. I can answer any questions if you have them or not. Oh, hey, hello. Yes.
So thanks for all the examples there kind of put together. But I'm wondering, like, what are some of the rules about what you can and cannot share with people? Like, everything's open and you can share everything, or is it case by case?
Everything that I have on any government item is FOIable. All of this data, if somebody asks me for it, I could give it to them. That's why I don't do the police department GIS as well as fire, because they have special FBI protocols, etc. What I do is just the general stuff that you can FOIA without getting a fight from somebody. And I just find this data, or I make it myself. So I take a lot of times. We didn't have a bus stop layer, so I took a whole week and drove around and found all 500 and something bus stops. And now we have a bus stop layer. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Dr. David Ladner, who is Associate Professor of Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences at Clemson.
All right. Said that. All right, good. Oh, it's getting late in the day, so I'll try to keep the lightning going, I guess. But correlating drinking water quality with kidney stones in South Carolina. That's a kidney stone. They hurt. This is what a kidney stone looks like on a molecular level. Whether you like black and white or you like color, it takes calcium and oxalate to make a kidney stone. Now you might think the more calcium you drink, the more kidney stones you would get. And that makes sense, except that oxalate is a big part of it. So oxalate comes in our food, and if you have calcium in the water that you're drinking, then it will bind there in your gut and be excreted. If you don't have enough calcium in the water that you're drinking, the oxalate can get into your kidney, and there it can bind with the calcium that's there and cause a kidney stone. So counterintuitively, the more calcium you drink, the less likely you are to have kidney stones. At least that's the working hypothesis. This was not my idea to start this project. It was mostly this guy's idea and this guy's idea. They teamed with them, and they're all in Philadelphia. But they contacted me, and I got in touch with a bunch of students because they had kidney stone data, and they presumed that we had hardness data. Hardness is calcium content, essentially calcium and magnesium, but mostly calcium. They presumed that I knew something about that, and I thought I did too, but it took a lot of work to put it all together. This is one map that shows part of what it takes, and most of this is going to be describing what it takes to figure out how much calcium people drink in the state of South Carolina. So this is a map showing plant locations. These are surface water treatment plants. So they're taking water from lakes and rivers and sending it out to people in these distribution systems. Now, one of our first tasks that we worked on was figuring out where all the plants are. That's easy. DHEC, the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, they know where all the plants are and they regulate these plants. But all the health database information was on the zip code level. And if you ask someone that works at this plant in Orangeburg, for example, what zip codes does your water go to? They have no idea. They don't think about that. They say, well, we send our water to the distribution system. And you ask them, can you send us your distribution system map? They say, maybe. What do you want it for? Some people post their distribution system map online for anyone to gather. Other people, when you ask them, can we get your GIS layer? No. We'll tell you like where the pipes go. Anyway, we spent a long time trying to put this together until I talked to one of my former students. And he happened to work for a consulting firm, and he was working with one of these guys somewhere, one of these plants. And I said, can you give us your GIS data? They sent me to him. He said, sure, here's the GIS data for your system. And then he said, after a year of working on this, by the way, we have a map of the whole state. Would that be useful for you? And I said, I called him right then. What? You have a map of the whole state? And he did. That was very useful. We added some extra information that wasn't on his map. And now we have a map of the entire state and where all the main water lines go, which I thought was pretty cool when we did it. Here's a zoomed in view showing all the pipes. You would think that would be pretty sufficient, except that, look, this one, this plant, this plant, this plant, and this plant are all connected to the same pipe network. So where does the water go? That requires a master's thesis study for each plant to figure out exactly where it goes. But they have a rough idea, and so we talked to individual people, and we put together a map of where things go. We said the best way to do it is come up with what you think is happening and ask someone about it. And they'll look at it and say, no, that's wrong. You get a lot of responses when you put something out there that's wrong, right? And so we corrected it. We moved the lines. And so all these show the locations. For example, this plant is delivering to this service area. This plant here in, where did it go? This plant here in Anderson is delivering to this service area. So we spent a lot of time on that. And we came up with this surface water coverage map. Down here, about the best we could say is that either a zip code receives 0 surface water, so everyone living here must be drinking groundwater, or a place might receive 100% surface water, like that location or this location here. And do you see a general trend, sort of upstate surface water, sort of low country groundwater, and maybe on the coast a mix? We can take that data and then tag each zip code with hardness for the surface water systems. And that's what that map looks like. And it's missing all the groundwater areas. But then we worked on groundwater that looks like this. It looked like this initially and became this. Still a lot of missing areas, but for the zip codes that are receiving groundwater, we got enough groundwater hardness data to make an initial map. Combine the surface water and the groundwater together, and we get this combined groundwater surface water hardness map for the entire state. Notice low hardness up here where we are, high hardness in some areas, especially those drinking groundwater. Then we bring in the kidney stone incidence map. This is the data that they had in Pennsylvania, and we said, hey, look at that, low hardness up here, high kidney stone incidence up here. Looks pretty good, right? And then we did the statistics, and our first correlation was this one. Look at that. This is actually just 2 sources for population data. You would think that 2 records of population would give you a very good fit. So it does, except that even that has outliers, right? That's what we wanted to see. This is what we actually saw. R-squared value of 0.04. Pretty amazing, right? The line is in the right direction, though. High hardness gives you low stone incidence. Something. We know that we have a long way to go before we get real statistics, but this was the first check. Along the way, though, we found another really interesting story. So here's surface water coverage. Here's kidney stone incidence. And here is the percent white population, to throw something that we haven't talked about yet. Did you know that in the upstate, we have zip codes that are close to or nearly 100% white people living in that area? And then we have other zip codes that are nearly 100% black population. And then we do the statistics on that. And if you put percent white here and incidence here, you see a much better correlation. And just to check ourselves, percent black this way, and we see much higher incidence for low percent black zip codes, which is amazing, right? This just came out of the data, and I was like, what's going on? But then I talked to the urologist, the original team leader, and he said, oh yeah, we know that. White males in particular, all you white males out there like myself, are much more prone to get kidney stones than essentially any other demographic. But especially African American population has a much lower risk of kidney stones. And so we can see then in our map that that is the overriding factor. We're looking for hardness, but we find that race is the biggest indicator in this particular data set. Where did it go? Percent white and then get kidney stones per year. It tracks pretty well. So now, of course, we need to do some more dense statistics that kind of like eliminates the race factor to try to see if we can see the water quality factor. And we're working on that. And the other big thing we need to do, though, is fill in the groundwater data. And that's what we're working on this semester. And we're making good headway with that group of students that I showed you. In general, then, take-home point, it's still inconclusive regarding the surface water, or I mean the hardness data. But race was kind of a confounding factor. But at the same time, it's kind of good that you can see things in the data and you feel some confidence about the quality of the data. So that was kind of interesting to see. We think this will have broader impacts, like if you, hold on. Okay. After a spill in West Virginia, you might remember this MCHM spill, a big tank of this chemical was spilled into the water. A lot of people in the area were wondering, are we affected? Are we affected? Like, people sort of don't really know where their water is coming from. But we hope that in a crisis situation like that, whether natural or man-made, that if we know a little more about our water quality and where it's coming from, we can use it to know when we need to protect ourselves or take care of ourselves. And correlating with other health databases is something that we're really interested in the future. So we're trying to continue building this data set. So I appreciate all the students. I don't know where to point this to. So all the students that are working on this, and that's what I wanted to say today. Yes.
You have something that you can trace the quality, change in the quality of the water
Over time?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Future quality.
Right. So the good thing is, for most of the data that we see over a span of decades, the water quality doesn't change too much. Like in the upstate, most of our water comes from rainwater, just that falls into the lakes and rivers. And since we don't have a lot of geology like limestone, and it's a short contact time with the rocks and minerals, we don't have a lot of hardness, and that's kind of a persistent thing over time. Even the groundwater data is somewhat stable too. But that is something that we're looking for. We're looking for trends as time goes in the data set. But for the most part, they're stable so far. Yes?
I don't know where you would find data sets like this, but looking into diet or the amount of households that use like water purifiers or
That's fabulous. What about food intake of calcium? Yes, definitely something that we're thinking about. Now, obviously, that's harder to, that's a whole nother, part of the project to figure that out. But it's something that has to be taken into consideration. The good part, though, is this hypothesis works if you think about it, like just on a chemistry level. It's really that water intake. Like if you're drinking water during your meal, then that's the calcium that can bind with oxalate and be excreted. And so we think that the water is still more important than the calcium that comes in sort of in solid form.
I'm wondering about this area that's taking in groundwater. Is that going still through a municipal treatment plant, or it's kind of let each house has their own well?
In some cases, it's municipal treatment. A lot of those areas are public, but a lot of people drink private groundwater too, or their own private well. And that's something we're actually working on a sampling campaign for next semester and next year. Go and do a lot of our own testing. You guys have a thought? Oh, okay. Yes.
Fill in that map. Seems like it's going to make your race issue even more confounding. Because the areas that are white are the areas that, or not only, but are the areas with the highest proportion of African Americans.
That's right.
So you might do better with some sort of dummy variable based on race.
Well, the good thing is the more data we have for those areas that have a high whatever population, we can sort of just eliminate the areas that have the other demographic, and the data set might be big enough to see trends just within that demographic. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, our final presenters are Dr. Christopher Post, Professor of Forestry and Environmental Conservation, and Blake Lytle, GIS Specialist and UAV Pilot.
Thank you. It's important to have toys, lots of toys. And Blake isn't a geospatial specialist, he's a geospatial savant. No, I don't think it's a downgrade. I think it's an upgrade. So we're going to talk about just take a few minutes here to talk about our UAV or drone program here at the center. And it's really important that you think about this, you talk to your friends about it, and UAVs or drones are going to have already had about $4 billion worth of economic impact. And over the last couple of years, as they kind of legalized them, they're predicting $80 billion worth of economic impact by 2025. And what I'm saying is this needs to be, one, you can get better data. Two, your students, and if you're students, you need to be involved in this technology. Three, we're here to help. And what we built is, and what we're going to talk about is kind of the program at the center. We've got a video of kind of the process that we go through when we fly to kind of educate you in some of the data products. And we'll talk about the UAVs that we have and a couple new ones, $120,000 worth of UAVs, which are on their way to share for the Clemson community. So, so what's the UAV program? And this is just a short summary, and we hope you'll come talk with us about it. But we're here training. Blake developed an amazing training with that in the Faro this morning for a couple hours. I'm sure we'll rehash and do some more. And please have Blake. I don't mean to talk too much, but I do. And then we hope to support classes, grants, and all the mission of Clemson through this UAV program. Blake, you want to talk a little bit about the processing that we're getting going for the data?
Sure. So we have licenses for photo scan and processing software. We currently have it installed on our lab machines, and we're working on workflows to put that processing around the whole cluster to use the high performance computing resources here at Clemson, and really make us able to handle really large data sets. Some of these data sets we're dealing with thousands of images. It takes really beefy GPUs to efficiently process this, like the leverage on that cluster. And we'll be, developing workshops and training to help all of you do that.
Great. more drones. No, we don't call them drones, but we do anyway. There's rules about drone use, and we've also been working with Lynn Fisher, who's the public safety person in charge of public safety at Clemson, because we formed a user group community on campus as well, because it's really important that we follow the FAA rules so we don't all get shut down. So it's a little self-serving, but it's really important. And that's part of students learning about this process, is what's legal and how to do it. And then we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the product. So in general, just kind of the overview, right, is that these are flying robots. You're not sitting there flying them. What you're doing is you're planning missions, you're going out collecting data, and then you're processing data into high resolution images, 3D models, all sorts of different things depending on the sensors that are in the plane or the quadcopter or whatever. So video time. Blake just developed this video. It's awesome. Yeah, great.
This video is a quick introduction to how a safe, successful flight is planned and executed to capture data with an unmanned aerial vehicle or system, also known as a drone. The UAV typically captures photos, which will then be processed to create a variety of data sets, such as aerial imagery, elevation models, and 3D point clouds. The first step in flight planning is to check a sectional chart, which is a map of regulated airspaces and other important information for pilots. Clemson's campus, shown here in orange, is in a zone where Class E airspace begins at 700 feet above the ground, leaving here in Class G, or unregulated airspace, and you don't need approval from air traffic control to fly. We will take note of the Oconee Airport nearby, the orientation of the runway, thinking about takeoff and landing patterns, and note that the stadium is a visible flight marker on the route. When possible, we'll use existing LiDAR data to perform a line of sight analysis in GIS to plan flight areas which will keep the aircraft within visual line of sight at all times. Next, the specific flight zones are set up using the flight control software. For our UAV, we define takeoff and landing positions and create individual mapping blocks or areas to be flown. The flight altitude, ground sampling distance, the percent overlap between photos are all specified. Next, the flight is previewed to review the logistics and set up any fail-safe procedures. During flight, the UAV is going to fly back and forth in parallel lines, capturing photos at predetermined intervals based on our parameters. We'll make sure all the batteries are charged and the equipment is ready to hit the field. Checklists are your best friend. The day of flight, we'll make sure to check for notices to airmen or non-airmen, which will warn of flight restrictions in our area. We'll also check out the weather forecast and ensure that no storms or hazardous weather are on the way. When we arrive at the field site, we'll verify that the site is safe to fly and free of people, noting any potential hazards and obstructions, and that the takeoff and landing corridors are clear.
Just blink.
UAV is essential to prepare for flight. Pre-flight checklists are required by the FAA and help ensure each flight will be safe and successful. Targets are set out on the ground in the area of interest, and their location is surveyed in or determined using high accuracy GPS. These ground control points will be used to accurately georeference the data to be processed later on. We launch the drone and send it away on its mapping mission. At this point, they will fly the pre-programmed route. The ground crew will keep the UAV in sight at all times and monitor progress in the software in real time. Once the flight block has been covered, the drone returns and makes a smooth landing. If multiple flights are required, the takeoff and landing procedure is repeated. Finally, the flight record is logged, and the data are downloaded and prepared for any processing to follow.
So it kind of gives you a sense of the planning and what's necessary. Blake is a licensed pilot. I am, and there's a couple others on campus. But the point is to build this as a capacity at Clemson. So because really for what we have and what we're doing, we're not behind the curve. We're in or ahead of the curve, and we want to keep it that way by getting people to use this technology. So we've got a couple quadcopters that have they have kind of true color cameras or just RGB cameras. And again, from that, we can take photos and we can create 3D models with the software we have. Some are probably more appropriate for classes, very lightweight. Wherever that one flew. And and this is BB Plus, which can cover up to 500 acres in one about an hour flight. We even have multispectral cameras that can go in there. They can help detect plant stress in forests or fields. So. Go ahead, we'll quickly go. Yep. But we were very fortunate to get some internal funding from Clemson with support of other folks' money to buy 2 really cutting-edge UAVs, about $60,000 each. One is, go on to the second. So a lot of people said, okay, I've got applications, but this was just a taste of what we think we can do with this. So, go fast. So the first one is a LiDAR UAV, and we can get 3D information out of the photos, but we can't see through things. The LiDAR can find the true ground for hydrology, or just to create that digital elevation model, and incredible resolution and accuracy. We can have from the laser coming down from the LiDAR, from the UAV, 100 or 150 points per square meter. So just incredible details. Uh-oh, out of time. So I'll speed up. You gotta have pretty pictures, right? Okay, pretty pictures. That's from the LiDAR UAV. Go ahead.
Gorgeous.
And the second one is a hyperspectral UAV. It's actually like flying a spectrometer up in the sky. 200 different bandwidth worth of information. Again, for plant stress, but we also think we can use it for transportation systems and roads to look and give get spectral information from all these things. 30 seconds, okay. You can see lots of stuff. Anyway, with that, with plans, you can pick out things. Yeah, go ahead. Blake's list of a few of the applications for UAVs, and I'm sure there's a lot more. And finally, my favorite picture. Here we go. So that's them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions about the UAV drone program?
Can I borrow it?
Sure. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
On a real note, would you guys use this as a guinea pig, or do you do outside like work? Spartanburg County is actually one of the only counties that hasn't got a LiDAR data set. So I wouldn't ask the county, but I would be interested.
Yeah, right now we're doing both internal and external outcomes, and we're trying to come up with examples and use cases, and especially because it's an opportunity to involve students in projects and things. Like UAVs are, that's the one limitation. The great thing is they're really high resolution. The only limitation is you can't do things like a county, but you can do critical areas in terms of hundreds of acres easily. So it's just, but anyway, definitely. Thank you.
Okay,
Prizes
thank you
time.
very much. Yeah, oh, sorry, one more question.
I'm a little curious, like you're gonna be collecting all these data over the years. Is there any sort of like data management plan to use NSF's work for like archiving this and making sure that 10 years from now, people know that you sort of already did a LiDAR?
Yeah, we're saving what we do, but and actually working on that idea, because it's a huge problem. The main problem is that unlike a lot of scientific data you have to keep, this is terabytes and terabytes and terabytes worth of information, but it also gives you that really detailed land cover or whatever your imaging change over time. So yeah, it's a critical issue, and that's kind of one of our tasks, to try to figure out how to archive this, and if it can be used by other people, again, back to the library helping us figure that out. So.
Just one comment on some of the things I've heard is that this infrastructure is for you. It's for you to go and take that, for you to go and get information, support the research, and academic. It's not for us, the center, to go and collect.
I have my own set of drones, don't worry. So.
Definitely, but having a data archiving going to be project, the data going to go to the archive, and then obviously library.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Start giving away the
We're not giving that away.
Are there any entries left? There are two over there for the 3D coloring contest. They seem like somebody did a lot of work on them. Are they yours and you want to submit them if they're yours? They're pretty cool. No, they're nobody's. Nobody's submitting those? Okay.
So right before we move into the final awards and things, I just like to take a moment to thank Patricia, the staff, Blake, Ellie, Patrick, all the interns, everyone in Green Shirts, even Nick, for helping us and supporting us. Everyone here at the center, right, works really hard all year long to really support you guys, to give you guys the resources and tools that you need to fulfill your goals and mission. And so I think this is a really great opportunity. They put in a ton of work. They put in a ton of work. I'm really happy to be here and enjoy it, but they have all put in a ton of work to make this happen. I think we should all give them a round of applause.
Also, if we're doing thank you to Stephen for bringing all the keynote speakers. It was very special to have such great quality speakers. So thank you very much. Willie, he went against the clock to get this 3D model. Some of them took more than 40 hours. Dr. Puss would allow us to use his 3D printer against the clock. I don't know how many kilos and kilos of, we use out of his printer to do that. So thank you so much. The libraries have been fantastic. So Chris Vinson and Rachel are here. They really helped us with the snacks, with putting a proposal to fund the GIS. So thank you very much. Ryan Real has been taking a lot of photos. He's from CCIT, so we really appreciate that. He's also a guru in social media, so thank you so much. Willie, I don't know how much I can thank you. He will be at the Watt Center on weekends trying to get a spot to print us more and more models. So we really appreciate those. Ellie, she was fantastic trying to get people from the counties and the cities to come here and organize it. So really appreciate those. And then we have Eric, and we have Providence and Semin and Connor, who've been also fantastic. So thank you for everybody doing Without further ado, we're going to start giving the prizes. And so we're going to have here Blake and Dr. Post giving away the prizes for Where in the World. And so the first prize is our most advanced drone with an HD camera. It's a camcorder that we're going to be giving away. Sorry. Yeah, the big one. The second prize is this hammock that we have here, this Eno hammock. We need somebody tall to help us bring it down. And then we're going to be giving away 2 hats, 2 shirts, 3 shirts, 4 shirts, and a book. So we have 9 prizes to give away for Where in the World. Also, if there's any building that you have any questions which building we was, or you would like to take it home because you are, you love Cycle, or Cooper is already taken for Chris Vincent, but you can take those home too if you like.
We need a couple. Some hats, shirts.
Okay, so do we have the drawing, the top 12?
Yeah.
So there were a few people who got all the buildings right. You want to say the buildings? Or?
We could do that.
Sure.
So, where's my answer? I don't remember.
Well, these are the 12, so they should be right. Yeah.
It's been a while. Okay. Number 1 over here on the wall is the Watt Family Innovation Center. Number 2 near our restrooms is Holzendorf Hall. Number 3 Brackett Hall. Number 4 McAdams Hall. We're on this side. Number 5 by the main entrance is Cooper Library. Number 6 by the exit was Sykes Hall. Number 7 was Lee. Number 8 Brooks Center for Performing Arts. Number 9 the Hendricks Student Center. Number 10, hopefully everybody got Tillman. Number 11 Core Campus, and number 12 was Hardin Hall.
Right.
So those were our questions.
And those are all the entries that got the 12.
Pretty good stuff.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Well
so you close your eyes. This has to be, and just pick the top one for the big drone.
Yep. Somewhere. Okay.
So the big drone going up. Fatima Turian? Fatima Turian? She's not here? Oh no! No! Next one. Sorry, you have to be present to win.
Colin Brand.
Colin Brand. Well, they should give it to you. Sorry, I'm on the way.
That's fine. All right. Congratulations. Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
What's next?
Next is the hammock. Where's the hammock?
Okay. Chris Nohelm? There you go. Here's the pronunciation.
It came in this cube box. Maybe
Put it back. That's excellent.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
It has math papers.
It's not gonna do.
Okay, third one is gonna be an orange Clemson hat.
That'd be sad. Matthew B.
Matthew B.
Or maybe we, Lee, maybe?
Matthew
Lee or
Lee?
B? Yeah, Lee or B. That one's a close one. There's a B on there.
Now we have a purple Clemson hat. Oh, you need to grab it from there. Also never used.
Okay. Laurel Bartlett?
I think that's it. Men's Clemson shirt or women's, depending who wins. We can get.
Okay. James Sarasua. Don't grow into it. It's just thinking forward.
We need a women's shirt. This is women's. This is not Clemson. This is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. This,
We may have to take them.
ladies. Very nice. Okay, pick a woman. Oh well, maybe for
Tell me
you.
I was gonna have a hard job. Casey Sumner.
There. Okay, a GIS a GIS day shirt.
And we have Brisbane Corsandi.
She's not here.
Anna Stout.
And then we have an Adolis. Another cool. Yeah, stay short.
James Berry.
James Berry?
James.
No?
This one's bigger, right? Max Teddy.
Max? Next one.
Max? Where's Shams? It paid off. Anyway, congratulations. Your persistence is well noted.
And we have a book, a map book.
Nice. Is it for the same
Yeah,
time?
yeah.
Map
This is for
book.
map
Thomas Shirley. Or Tom's?
Looks like Thomas Shirley.
Thomas Shirley? No?
We're starting to run well.
Yeah, I know. We'll get through everyone by the time we're done. It's good. Meredith McSeward, someone?
Meredith? Yeah. Thank you. All right, so I think that's it. Thank you so much to both of you for. We're gonna give away the prizes for the map gallery, and Patrick is gonna be giving those away. So the author with the most votes is gonna get this drone. Who is the winner? Who's the winner? Do we have the winner for the map gallery? Number 15. Can you say your name, your department, and the title of your?
My name is Neil Priscilla. I'm from the Department of Engineering. I would like to thank Plan Flight.
Awesome. Thank you. And the runner-up, okay, and the runner-up is gonna get an orange Clemson hat. That one, and that's an entry number 16 over there too. Number 16. Yeah. Congratulations. And you say your name and your department and
Yeah, and my advisor is not TikTok. Teachers also, but teachers also help me a lot.
Okay, congratulations.
Yeah.
Just one something.
Yeah.
Good job, Cyril.
Yeah, I know. It's like, okay, now we have entries for judges. So can we bring all the judge entries? Patrick, come back here. So we are gonna draw from the people that were judging and were voting for their favorites. We're gonna give away 5 prizes. One of them is a small drone. Do we have this small drone? Yeah. Also, it still has an HD camera. Okay. So do we have all the entries? Huh? Yeah, that's an island. Yes. So there's a lot of entries. Please shuffle them in. So shirt, I want a shirt. Okay, ready? Can you pick one? Yeah. All right.
Looking at the name.
Yeah.
Helena Alfonso.
Helena. Okay, next one is gonna be a men's plunger shirt. The Mappy one. Okay.
Fedemeli Tanyan? Torian?
Fedemeli Torian?
Could be. Maybe.
Fedemeli Torian?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You want to see? You want to see women? Yes. Let's do the men's now.
All right. Andrew Proctor?
Andrew Proctor. 4 o'clock, nobody should give anything to do. Sorry.
Don't tell him, guys.
Okay, next one.
Okay.
Dominic Marisol.
Dominic Marisol? No, okay.
Rezvan Kersan? Kersani, I'm sorry. Yes.
Rezvan? She's not here.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
One wants to do it. Mendy Nassim Benissa?
Yeah, all right. He has them, yeah, he has them. Okay, we still have a GIS day shirt. Pretty cool. Okay, one more. We have two, we have and then my.
Wait, what? What are we doing?
Yeah, he still needs to go two more.
That's okay.
I feel like I'm holding the box.
Let's see, Jay Kevin?
Jake?
Jay?
Kevin?
Jay.
Yeah? All right.
Go. Yes, sir.
back is the cool part.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and a map book, one more.
That book. Harold Lemuncher?
I know.
That's the professor, right?
Yeah.
Gerald, not here, he has his event at 4:30.
Rachel Bowers.
Yeah? Oh, no, she needs to be present, sorry. Sorry.
Ed Bowers.
We did not do that on purpose.
No. And I don't know them. Okay, so that's it for the map gallery. Now we're gonna go with the safety survey. Have you filled out the safety survey online? Any place where you feel unsafe on campus? The first prize is the football signed by Dabo Sweeney. So if you haven't, it's a quick link there. So Blake, do we have a set of numbers? Can you come up here? And we need an innocent person to give us. Maybe Rachel? Rachel is going to be drawing the numbers. You just have a list of numbers, right? With the names, like on Excel? Entries 1 to 100 or something? Okay, go ahead. You are going to give away the prize. She's going to give away the prize. Okay. So that's number 1 is going to be the football.
Oh no. Okay, I only have an email address. Bart
Bartleby?
Bartleby, yes. Second one, again, email addresses. So ATREADO.
Matriado.
That's me. Okay. What did she win?
A Clemson hat.
Okay.
Here.
Okay. Okay. I already won something.
Well.
Okay.
Next time we should do it if you want.
Okay.
We need only 1 minute.
Okay. Next winner is ALGUY. Allguy@gmail. I'm sorry, at Clemson.edu.
Huh?
Anybody know that email address? ALGUY. Okay, next. What's moving? Okay, next one is next winner ENEWCOM.
This is our Clemson ID.
At Clemson.edu. Okay. Okay, keep going. ALMARIB at Clemson.edu.
Marie.
No, you hear? This is hard. ECRHODE.
E Road.
Who's that? No? Okay. K Willett? KW. Okay. Okay, great. I'll stop.
Okay, let's do the Tiger Spirit. Thank you, Rachel.
Sure.
Okay. The Fitbit. So we're gonna, if you fill out the map in the Tiger Spirit, your favorite place at Clemson, you can get Sammy is gonna give you the prize. So who is the winner?
James Berry.
Yeah, that was there before. Next one.
Rachel.
Bauer. What? Awesome. Next one is men's Clemson shirt. What was your favorite place?
Oh, it was the Rowing Docks.
Morgan Demery.
Morgan? Yay! Do we have appointments left?
Here.
Or if you wanna? That one or this one? Whichever you want.
I'll take this one.
Okay. All right. And then we have
Dominic Moros.
another. Oh, yes, another.
Dominic Morosuk.
Dominic? Nope, I think we call it.
Danny James.
Danny James?
Holmes.
Yeah. Do we have a men's? There's a men's, there should be a men's there. Yes, that one. Or,
Yeah, we got a
yeah,
minute.
okay, we have a men's. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. What was your favorite place?
Football stadium.
The football stadium. Okay, then a youth research. Can you show the shirt? A little bit tiny. It's a youth one.
Frankenfeld.
Are there any kids?
Jennifer Ogle.
She's not here. Civil.
Casey Sumner.
So he's got a women's shirt.
You want to swap? No. Yeah, last year we said you only want one person, so if they have to choose. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that. Okay. Next one.
The next one. We should done.
I think we have adult desk research. Yeah, I can. This is an adult short GIS day. Can you show the back?
Adika.
Oh, she's going to. Oh, man.
We have his department.
Gavin Hudson. Gavin Hudson.
Gavin Hudson.
Jamie Santana.
Yay! Okay, and then book Children Map the World. And then we have a book giveaway.
Alina Hofrower.
Okay. Again. Thank you. Okay, so I think that's it. What we have now is to give away the 2 hoodies, one for men, one for women, for the 3D coloring contest. So give us a couple minutes. Basically, who hasn't received a prize that hasn't received? It will be a little bit more fair. Dr. Sperry, do you mind coming here and helping us with being adjusted? So we need to choose 2, one most accurate and one most artistic.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So these are the entries.
Okay.
Most accurate.
Oh, most
These are
accurate.
of
Okay.
Clemson, and one is most artistic. This is 13. These are all different entries. So pick your most accurate and then the one most So Dr. Sperry has chosen the most accurate and the most artistic 3D coloring contest.
The most accurate is Hannah.
Is Hannah here? Can you choose another one for
Oh,
most
yeah.
accurate?
Okay. Right here. Elizabeth.
Elizabeth! Yay!
And then you go there.
And then most artistic.
Here's the, yes, there we go. And then is Carrick.
It's, I think it's Tahara.
Tahara. Tahara.
Yeah.
Okay.
you have a women's t-shirt?
No, I like it. Come on.
Better deal, I think.
Can you choose a third one out of the ones that we have here? And a fourth one?
The third and the fourth?
Yeah.
Okay, just
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll do that. And then that's
So, yeah.
Sammy?
Sammy? Sammy?
Okay,
Yeah?
Sammy.
Oh, we have women. Do we have any men? Any men? Sorry, we only have women. If anybody wants to
Give it
speak,
to your
men,
girlfriend.
women.
Oh, so one that is women, I'm hearing.
Okay, and one last one.
Yeah, Katie. Come on, we'll do Katie.
Katie? Is Katie here? The only Katie's that entered the 3D coloring contest. No, she's not here.
Okay. Yeah, one. Okay. Let's see. James, there, Susan. Double to double. You want your?
Oh, James, who's your dad?
I think that's it. We have cupcakes. Please have some cupcakes. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
So excited. I wanted this one. Ellie's like, you gotta come cheer us for having taxis. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you. I sent a picture to my mom, Ellie. She's like, thank you guys so much for putting this on. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, can you send me that? Well,
I know, I saw, hey, I didn't miss out on it. As long as he wasn't there.
Yeah, I went to I'm sorry. Really?
Can you send me like whatever y'all need? I would be very
Can one of you please take a picture of us?
Yes.
And you can leave some of those if you want.
Thank
Three times, it starts.
Send that hours out.
And it kind of flops around.
Not that good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't see that. Hey girl.
That was really cool. You guys are awesome. Yeah, I've never seen compared to such a nice girl. Is it the weather? There's always yeah, like, oh, have you been outside? It's so pretty. Mine doesn't stay outside.
Nice work on all
Thank you
this.
for coming.
Yeah, good job organizing.
You're
Good talk. I enjoyed
awesome.
it.
That's very cool. Yeah, it's really good use of GIS. I'm just like,
Oh, you have like so much, it's so data rich though. So that's why I asked my question, because like maybe I'll be hitting you up like asking for.
I mean, we could probably get you something with the identifying information script if it's law enforcement stuff. Everything else I'm happy to share.
Okay, yeah.
Just,
Like, do you have a water line, for example?
Farmer Water does, and they're the kind of folks who are like,
They are a little more.
but I could possibly try to talk to somebody and see if they'd be willing to give it to the university for like research purposes. Although I do have an old layer. I have one from like 2002. More lines have gone into the same run, so the system hasn't changed very much.
Yeah.
I can ask what the differences are. So that you'll have an idea. I don't have any business cards.
I'm sure I can find you. Like, well, your info is on.
Cities for, oh yeah.
See you guys. Have a good day.
No, I don't look at it's like a captive on it, so I just get to talk. It's like being on top. Like, it was like talking about oh my goodness.
All righty. Yeah, that's my. You guys want to?
We should arrange that lunch we were talking before with Ashley.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should do that sometime.
Yes, yeah, no, let's see, that would be good. I mean, the thing we need to do, looking at right now is, what I'm saying, develop a consulting group on the side, and a woman's own consulting group.
We would get so
Small
many
business.
contracts.
Well, you've got opportunity. You gain more opportunity.
You'll gain more. Yes.
Well, that's it, but that's the idea. And what I'm going to say quickly, let's look and see, figure out a strategy on that. And I'm there just to help you with it. But let's just see, because there would be an opportunity. There's an attraction here that I think millennials like because of the recreation that is around here, and the Greenville combination between those two, and then not being that far away from Atlanta or Charlotte. So it's a good area to locate on. And get a base here eventually. We can get again cheaper labor with also university students. So I'm just saying, there's an opportunity we can put up something as a project and get it in at the right price point. I can help you. Those are my old consulting goals. But what we have to start to look at is start to look at these jobs that are coming up. And so there's festivities and a couple others. I'll look and see how much they cost. But festivities is the federal government. And that's the thing, you just keep looking and searching, and that's part of those opportunities and looking at that stuff. So if we do that and we see something interesting, then we can look at putting a proposal together. Yeah, no, because this is a good time for everything right now.
Thank you for sharing us. That's awesome. I don't even know what I'm doing.
Yes, you do know.
Muddling.
Yes, she does. She does. No,
I know a slight bit more than I did yesterday.
you know a lot more than you think you do, and you know a lot more than what a lot of people think they know. Okay, that's what I was saying. All right.
Sure, that works. I'll bet that.
Yeah, just even look at what was today, and what was real information, and what was sugar-coated.
I was going to mention that I started digging into network analysts. That was like a rabbit hole, and I haven't had time to like really.
I'll tell you, the best one to work with is you know they have tutorials with that. But the multimodal database with Paris is not a bad one to work with. I think is probably the best one of showing how to set that up. And the only thing is it's coming up. Is the key thing to understand is when you're putting networks together, you know, walking, bus, whatever on your, it's wherever there are nodes that are interacting, they literally have to be on top of each other. You just can't assume, oh, this road goes across here. Literally, the node, the digital point of that has to be with the other one exactly on top of each other. They don't know, points don't know anything. Think about it. Points know nothing about the lines. All right. So a point knows to a point, a line knows to a line. You see, that's what they don't ever say that, but that is the key thing. I took that for a while when I was setting it up. What am I doing wrong? And that's when I figured that out over. No, that would be good. That would be good on that one. And if you wanted to see what we did before, it's got the old one that we did. We had in Anderson at any time. That little David, you can always look at that before you play. Because that one was set up to do all that stuff.
Great, that would be good practice. I literally have to build partner living, which is a trail.
Well, you've got now. Do you have what do you have? Do you have the road network, the ESRI road network, or which one do you have?
I have Farmer Counties, which I think is DOTs, but I also have
DOTs, you probably wouldn't get that and working from it, but then compare that. You can compare, you know, I shouldn't say that, but you know, looking at it, just have that clip out the county on here with that, and at least you would have a geodatabase to start working with. And then looking at that. And then they're separating out on a couple of things. But that's one I would consider.
Cool. Well, it was great to see you, Dr. Sperry. Thanks for thinking of us. How are you feeling? How are you doing? How's retirement?
Oh, it's good. I'm fine. Yes, I am.
Yes, I did, but she didn't want to work with me.
Hey, good. I wish I'll be able to retire someday. I don't think I will.
Actually, it's surprising. You never look at it, but when you finally have to do it, I mean, you keep building it up. And then when my wife started, I said, "Oh my gosh, I got to really look at this thing." And then you start to figure out, well, that'll be the one time that it's actually good. The pension. You'd be surprised when that pension actually.
I don't know.
Oh, you stayed in the other one? Okay.
Well, I mean, some people turn it on, but usually you don't have to do a good job. You might be gone in a few years. I think so.
Right.
But you stay private and just plug them on there. Right? It's as you can tell by the bankruptcy of the state system, it's a very good deal. Right?
Yeah.
So, but let me give you a card. Let's chat some.
Thank you so much. I will send you email. I never remember to bring my business card.
No, just send me an email. It's better anyway.
Yeah, that's
Because I'm like end up with all these cards. And,
Gotcha, you'll be fine. Yeah, you just
Send
send,
me
no, that'll work.
we got one card. We're more than good. So we're going out and doing demos, and it's really interacting with cities and counties and stuff. It's all you get. That's what students are going to end up doing with their jobs, right? So it's really important to have real use cases for this stuff. A lot of stormwater stuff, and there's a whole bunch of needs.
I mean,
so,
the lack of data that we have is crazy. But we're also pursuing a brownfields grant, and we will likely get it because we've had a very successful brownfields program before. And it's just for the Highland neighborhood.
Right.
Brownfield?
Brownfield.
That they can do with a hyperspectrum. That would help.
Oh yeah, that's a great.
No, that would be good.
Well, we got Bruce Rafer, who used to be our dean. He's a physicist and knows how to deal with data. The hard part with hyperspectral is getting something, being able to process it. He's got tons of stuff, so it's really be able to. And we're buying turnkey systems because that will just fly. Because you can buy a part, but then it takes a year to put it on something nice. So that's no, this is all.
So cool, like you can just basically tell where to go.
Yeah, and I've been talking about the city with Clemson just to kind of keep track of developments. Like,
Actually, we could probably use that too, because our downtown is like.
Yeah, and some of that stuff with the cheap stuff is really not that hard. Because there's a lot of that system and legally and everything else. So, but anyway.
Cool. Yes, I will know.
No, that'd be promising.
We're just
introduce myself.
I'll put it back on.
Yeah.
How many are there?
Three, I think William Hammond took maybe another one. One person. Where is she?